Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for showing up so bright and early after that little Super Bowl party that we threw for the nation of Israel last night. It was a bit of a trifecta: Pastor Hagee, Ambassador Dermer, Ambassador Haley, just leaders in their own right, and so refreshing to see them all standing united as one voice for the nation of Israel. Amen? Well, that trend is going to continue this morning. You know, we come to Washington, D.C. every year. This is our most important task. And we come to engage with our leaders. And this morning we are humbled that our leaders have come here to engage with us. Yes, let's give them a hand. The following, ladies and gentlemen, understand that a strong America and a strong Israel mean a better and safer world, and they all work tirelessly to that end. So we're going to get our view from the Hill started this morning with Congresswoman Cathy Mcmorris Rodgers. She's the chair of the House Republican Conference and the fourth highest ranking Republican in the House. She's also the highest ranking Republican woman in Congress. She was first elected to the House in 2004 and is a rising star in American politics. Mcmorris Rodgers strongly supported recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. Embassy, stating, "Israel is our greatest friend and ally in the Middle East, a country whose history and culture are at the center of our civilization. Now, the U.S. Embassy officially and proudly stands in its capital, the great holy city of Jerusalem," end quote. Yes. During her tenure, Congresswoman Mcmorris Rodgers has co-sponsored several bills to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship as she strongly defends one of our greatest allies. She is a co-sponsor of the Combating BDS Act, the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, and the Taylor Force Act, which we all know became law in March of last year and was one of our top agenda items. Will you please make welcome a champion for Israel, Congressman Cathy Mcmorris Rodgers.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Great to be here. It's truly a blessing to be here. And more than anything, I want to thank Pastor Hagee and his wife and entire family for their leadership, for bringing us all together here in Washington, D.C. to advance the cause of Israel. I'm most grateful, though, for your prayers, because I believe little prayer, little power. More prayer, more power. Much prayer, much power. There are so many faithful people like all of you that have been praying. And it's amazing for me to see the impact of those prayers in my own life, as well as our work here in the nation's capital. So, more than anything else, remember to keep praying. It makes a difference. I had never been to Israel until I was elected to Congress, but I grew up loving Israel. You may not know that much about me, but I'm from Eastern Washington, where we grow wheat and we have apples. The Israel I grew up loving was the Israel of the Bible, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, and of Jesus. It seemed like of all the places on earth, this is the place that God must love most. There was also the Israel of the Six-Day War, the brave Israeli tank commanders, but those were faint images. Israel was abstract and a little unreal. Now, having gone to Israel several times, I know a real Israel with traffic jams and construction sites, high-tech startup companies, a democratic Israel that even has politicians, and they're doing okay, but despite that, kind of like we are. And I saw how real the struggle is for the survival of Israel, surrounded by her enemies. Enemies who think nothing of suicide bombing innocent children. or launching hundreds of rockets across the border. And I wondered, as many of you have, how long would the United States tolerate rockets against Los Angeles or Detroit from Mexico or Canada? Not one day, not 1 hour. And now I know the reality that Israel is a small country geographically. You know, it's just an hour's drive from Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast to Jerusalem. An hour's drive is just minutes for a fighter jet or for a missile. Before I went to Israel, I knew it in my head. Now I know it in my heart. Israel exists because God ordained it. It's the promised land. And when you visit Israel, that's impressed upon your heart more than anything else. The stories of the Bible come to life. They are real. The stories of Abraham and Isaac that were waiting for, or Abraham and Sarah waiting for a child in Hebron, kings being anointed in the city of David, or in Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed with his disciples the night before he was crucified. Our blessings today and our Judeo-Christian values we stand for trace back to our Jewish roots, and it's our connection to Israel that brings God's history and his glory. Israel is our true north. Its history and its culture is at the very center of our civilization. And we must work tirelessly to make sure that the United States is the unequivocal, staunch, bipartisan, and steadfast friend of Israel. That's why President Trump and the Republican Congress have sent a clear message that the evils of terrorism don't stand a chance against the strength of Judeo-Christian values. Today, we celebrate that our embassy is officially located in the great holy city of Jerusalem. We've increased funding on the Iron Dome missile defense system. We have imposed sanctions on Iran for the regime's destructive activities. President Trump has ended our participation in a flawed Iranian deal. And we are strengthening our pressure to make sure this regime does not come any closer to developing a nuclear weapon. In addition, we've kept our promise to prioritize our own security, rebuild our military, and build a strong economy. And here's why that matters to Israel. In a delegation meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, we asked him, what's the most important thing that we can do for Israel? And he said, build a strong economy. For America to be a diplomatic power, America must be a military power. In order for America to be a military power, America must be an economic power. It's all connected, and he's absolutely right. Today, because of our work to lift the regulatory burden, lift the tax burden, our economy is stronger at home, and it makes us stronger abroad. Last month, unemployment was at 4%. That tied a 50-year low. You can compare that to 9.9% in 2010. People are coming off the sidelines and into the workforce. Companies are coming home. 3.7 million jobs have been created since President Trump was elected president. These results, coupled with Republicans' work to rebuild the military, is not just good news for Americans who are better off now, it's good news for Israel too. No matter who you are, we all share a vested interest in the security of Israel. Israel is not what's wrong with the Middle East. It's the only democracy there. Israel is what is right. And it still faces threats every single day. I know that this conference is focused on this being the turning point. And I wanted to share the last time I went to Israel, I had the chance to visit a Jewish settlement in Samaria, Judea, Samaria. We often refer to that as the West Bank. And I went and visited an industrial park, which was owned by Israelis. But it was interesting to note that at the bakery, 70% of those employed were Palestinians. And why were they working there? Because the job was 3 to 4 times the pay compared to anything else that they could find. And I couldn't help but thinking, here you have Israelis and Palestinians working side by side. Now, everything that came out of that bakery was stamped with BDS because it was in the West Bank area. But you know what? They were working side by side. We went and visited JH Ranch, which is a leadership ranch there in Ariel, where Israelis, Muslims, and Palestinians come together and they learn about God. And they learn about God's purpose in their life. And again, they're coming together. And I thought, this is a turning point, and this is the beginning of a bottom-up approach to living in peace and working in peace. I'm certain that America will never abandon our values, and Israel is not going to let any other country jeopardize its survival. So we will continue to stand with Israel with unwavering resolve. And we need you to continue your critical mission to encourage millions of pro-Israel Christians to be educated, empowered, and effective forces for Israel. So thank you for what you've done and for what you continue to do. I'd like to leave you with one last story. When Brian and I walked next to the Sea of Galilee, or we saw the walls of the old city in Jerusalem and the Jordan River, Israel changed us. From that place of Bible stories into a place that's very special and personal. And the funny thing is, it isn't diminished by the daily buzz of modern life. You can look around and think, these people should be listed with Moses, David, and Solomon fighting for the survival of their people. If the Bible were being written today, their stories would be in it, and so would yours, and the great work that you've done, because the struggle for Israel is a great one. And it's one within my heart. Remember what God told Abraham. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you, and curse those who curse you, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. May God bless Christians United for Israel and all of your work, making Israel your #1 mission. God bless you, God bless America, and God bless Israel. Thank you very much, everyone. Great to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for those strong and passionate words. Is anybody in here from the state of Arkansas? Yes, I know you are, because we have strong representation on our executive board from the same. I am pleased to introduce to you Senator Tom Cotton. United States Senator from Arkansas, Senator Cotton sits on the Banking Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Armed Services Committee. Senator Cotton grew up on his family's cattle farm in Yell County. He graduated from Harvard and Harvard Law School. After a clerkship with the United States Courts of Appeals and private law practice, the terror attacks of 9/11 called him from the practice of law to serve for 5 years on active duty in the United States Army as an infantry officer. The senator served with the 101st Airborne Division, and between his 2 combat tours, served with the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. The senator's military decorations include the Bronze Star Medal, Combat Infantry Badge, and Ranger Tab. Senator Cotton has sponsored several bills related to holding Iran accountable for sponsoring terrorism and violating human rights. And in response to the president's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the senator stated, "It was an acknowledgement of the plain truth, as it has always been, and the only way to secure a just and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians is to build upon a foundation of truth." Can we please welcome the senator from Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for that very warm welcome and great introduction. Thank you to the entire Hagee family for having me here today, and thank you all for traveling so far to our nation's capital to speak on behalf of the nation of Israel. Thank you for all you have done, now 4 million strong, to build our friendship and our alliance with the nation of Israel. Thank you for all you did to help get my friend Mike Pompeo confirmed as our new Secretary of State. And I'll tell you, isn't it a refreshing change to have Mike as the Secretary? There'll be no more stabbing Israel in the back at the United Nations. There'll be no more ill-tempered tirades against the Israeli government. So you can know that as long as Secretary Pompeo holds that office, when America's top diplomat meets with Israel's prime minister, they will stand shoulder to shoulder, which is the way it always should be. It goes to show the difference that a single election and your hard work in an election can make. 2 years ago, our enemies were riding high all across the Middle East. ISIS had overrun Iraq. Russia had swooped into Syria and saved Bashar al-Assad and propped up Iran's influence. And Iran had hoodwinked the United States into a terrible nuclear deal and turning over more than $100 billion in sanctions relief. And how did our government react? Did they rally the West against Assad and Iran? Did they isolate the Ayatollahs? No, it was just the opposite. While Iran was building centrifuges in Natanz, the last administration was lecturing Israel for building homes in Judea and Samaria. The last administration should have followed Abraham Lincoln's old advice: never sell old friends to buy old enemies. It does no good to feed our friends to the crocodiles in hopes that he will eat us last. But now we've started turning things around. We've withdrawn from the anti-Israel UN Human Rights Commission. We've passed the Taylor Force Act to stop subsidizing Palestinian authorities' payments to the families of terrorists. And we've withdrawn from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. And at long last, we have finally, once and for all, moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to the capital of the nation of Israel, now and forever, the city of Jerusalem. Now, today we understand that the nation of Israel is a friend, and we should treat it like a friend. We have to present a united front, especially when it comes to Israel's security. You may have heard a lot about protesters on the border with Gaza. I have to say, when people show up on the border with heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades and mortars and rockets, I don't call them protesters, I call them invaders, and they should be treated as such. And with Hamas launching that kind of coordinated military assault on Israel, it is more important than ever that we continue our partnership with Israel on missile defense technology. We should also cut funding to any United Nations organization who has recognized Palestine as a member. And lastly, we should formally declare what we already know to be true, that Israel has sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and we should recognize that fact. And we also have to confront our common enemy, Iran. That's why I've introduced new legislation to expose the ill-gotten wealth of senior Iranian regime officials and to prohibit any Iranian official involved in taking American hostages and his family from entering the United States. If you are holding an American hostage away from his children or his wife or his parents, then your wife and your kids and your family should not be vacationing in the United States of America. And we as a nation, just like Israel as a nation, should do everything we can to support perhaps the only people who have suffered more from the Ayatollahs than Americans and Israelis. We should support the noble aspirations for freedom and dignity of the Iranian people. Now, we should do these things not only because it's in our common interests, because we have a special friendship with Israel that is no accident of history and is not a mere alignment of interest. There's a reason the largest Jewish metropolitan area in the world outside Tel Aviv is New York. There's a reason that pilgrims called America the New Zion. Both of our nations are beacons of freedom in a dangerous world. And even before the modern Israel was founded, there was a special bond between America and the Jewish people, because America welcomed the Jewish people and did not feel threatened by them. In the old world, the demands of the nation-state too often clashed with the heritage of the Jewish people. You could belong to one or the other, but too often not to both. But in America, you could do just that. America is, after all, a nation of immigrants, just as Israel is today. Here, we don't think you have to abandon your heritage to be a loyal American. In fact, it's the freedom to be a Jew that causes the Jewish people to love America even more. And the American people have never seen a contradiction in the Jewish people's love for the United States and their love for their biblical homeland. In our minds, just as America would be the home of people from all walks of life who yearn for the freedom that comes with self-government, Israel would be the home of the Jewish people who for 2,000 years yearned to govern themselves in freedom once again. So ours has been a natural kinship from the very beginning. Both peoples settled the land, working and sweating to build up their countries. Just as the Virginia colonists hacked away through the swamps of Jamestown, the Jewish pioneers hacked their way through the swamps of the Jezreel Valley. Just as the Pilgrims scratched down a living in the rocky soil of New England, the Jewish Legion veterans made a desert bloom. And once they settled their lands, both peoples fought valiantly to claim their freedom. When you read Israel's Declaration of Independence with its stirring promises to protect the freedom and equal citizenship of all, you encounter the spirit of America's Declaration of Independence. When you learn about Israel's war for independence, you can't help but hear echoes of the American Revolution. Just as Sam Adams thundered in favor of independence, Zev Jabotinsky sounded a clarion call for the Jewish state. Just as Alexander Hamilton joined the New York militia to defend his home state, Moshe Dayan defended his country's capital by commanding the Jerusalem front. And just as we, the American people, revere our founder, George Washington, the Israeli people revere their founding father, David Ben-Gurion. There were plenty of bleak times in the American Revolution, just as there have been bleak times when Israel was locked in a seemingly endless war. Yet here we stand, stronger than ever, two modern-day Davids prevailing against all the odds in the world. So I close by asking this simple question. How can one read our two people's histories and fail to see the hand of providence guiding the affairs of mankind? In the struggle between good and evil, between righteousness and wickedness, between freedom and slavery, you may take your resolution with the knowledge that He is not neutral in that struggle. And we can all be confident that after all is said and done, after all the ups and downs, Zion and the new Zion will prevail in that struggle, and freedom will not perish from this earth. And I want to thank you all for what you do in that struggle, for the hardships you undertake, for the long distances you travel, for the advocacy you promote, for the prayers you give to people like me and my peers in Congress, our nation's leaders, for the people of Israel and their leaders. It means more than you can ever know. So I'll simply close by saying thank you and God bless you. God bless the United States, and God bless the nation of Israel.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. I'm proud to welcome United States Congressman Mark Meadows to the CUFI National Summit. Congressman Meadows is in his third term in Congress and has been serving North Carolina's 11th District since January of 2013. Congressman Meadows serves on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where he chairs the Subcommittee on Government Operations. He also serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. In November of 2016, Mr. Meadows was elected chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Yes. This is a group of roughly 40 conservative members of Congress dedicated to giving a voice to those who feel forgotten by their government. The congressman has been a vocal supporter of the State of Israel, traveling to Israel with bipartisan congressional delegations, and afterwards publishing an op-ed in The Hill, bringing light to the media bias presented as Israel defends its borders against terrorist attacks. He has co-sponsored several legislative items related to Israel, including the U.S.-Israel Security Assistance Authorization Act, recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel, the U.S. Strategic Partnership Act, and the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. Can we make welcome a champion for conservative causes from the Tar Heel State, Congressman Mark Meadows.
Good morning. It is great to be with you. Good morning. I came this morning to encourage you. It is time that we take back this city for His cause and for the nation of Israel. It is time. It is time. And somehow I believe that you're willing to do that. I understand that you're anxious to get to the Hill. Now, I don't know why. But as you're anxious to get to the Hill, I'm going to keep my remarks brief, but even with those remarks, hopefully you will leave here encouraged. Because I can tell you, I can see your hand and the hand of God each and every day making a difference in this country for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, because we must stand together to fight for a cause when others are not willing to do that. Now, my wife, I've been married 38 years, and, well, thank you. If you really knew me, you knew that you would have to really applaud her. So, as being married that long, she really cuts to the chase. When I'm talking about something, she says, well, what are you going to do about it? Now, there's two ways things happen in Washington, D.C., slow and never. And if you just realize that, it kind of changes your perspective. But I guess the question I have for many of you is, are you willing to do something about it? Are you willing to really do something about the problems that we face? And I believe that you are. Now, sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. We were just backstage, and I got the news that came across that there was a Syrian jet that came over into Israel space, and it was just shot down just a few minutes ago. But sometimes it's a matter of really knowing what goes on and doesn't go on. For example, when we continue to send money to the UN for countries who are anti-American and anti-Israel, it's got to stop. Don't you think it's about time that it stops? It's about time. And I think that we have somebody in Secretary Nikki Haley that will do just that, don't you? She's the real deal. And what we must do together is stand together and acknowledge what is going on, and yet be willing to stand up and voice the opposition when everyone else is willing to be silent. Because silence does not serve his cause or our cause. Because the left, what they want you to do is they want you to censure yourself. They want you to keep quiet because, it's really time. I was amazed yesterday. The president put out a tweet in all caps about the nation of Iran, and the left went crazy over a tweet. Now, where were they when $1.7 billion was sent to Iran, as a ransom? It is about time that we stand up and say enough is enough. Enough is enough. Let them hear your voice. Let them hear your voice. Enough is enough. I was with Ambassador Dermer, which I understand he addressed the group last night and did a great job. And the ambassador, listen, he waxes eloquently. He has, he can tell more stories and just bring you in so that you're living it with him. I was meeting with him very early as a freshman member of Congress, and when you're a freshman member of Congress, you have a hard time even finding the bathroom. So I'm just here to tell you. But my wife says, "What are you going to do about it?" And I said, well, honey, I was meeting with the ambassador this morning, and his phone kept going off. And I said, well, your phone keeps going off, and it must be an important phone call. You need to go ahead and take it. And he said, well, that's not actually my phone ringing. That's actually an alert on my phone that says that there's rockets going into Israel. And it had gone off that morning in a brief meeting that I had with him 42 times. And yet there was nothing on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox that morning that would suggest that the nation of Israel was under attack. And he had this app, and I said, well, I would love to have that app on my phone so that I could at least be aware, so that when we are aware, we can do something about it. There was one problem. The app was in Hebrew, and Hebrew is not a second language in North Carolina, I can just tell you. And so I said, well, what can we do about it? So as a freshman member of Congress, I worked with the ambassador, and I said, we need to get that translated from Hebrew to English so that we can put it on our phone. So there's been millions of downloads of that particular app in English. It's called Red Alert. And here's the reason why that is important. If you don't have it on your phone, I would encourage you to download it. And if you're like me, get your child or your grandchild to download it for you. And once you get it on there, it helps with awareness. And the reason why I share that is because that awareness, sometimes things are happening when you have no idea that they're happening. This morning I was in my quiet time, and as I was in my quiet time, the red alert went off 9 times. I was there in the peaceful setting of my comfortable chair there in the morning where I normally do my quiet time, and yet I knew that someone else over in Israel, they were having to go to shelter because of incoming missiles. Now, that would be enough because you're not seeing that reported this morning, but yesterday there was 12 times that red alert went off in the middle of the night. Well, it was the middle of the night for us, but it was the morning for them, and as we look at that, here was an awareness that what we have to do is understand that Israel is under attack each and every day. It is not about protest, it is about aggression, and it's about time that we call it out for what it is. It's Hamas, and we need to go after it. It is time. Now, I share that because all of you will make note of the Red Alert app, and so I'm going to count on all you wives to ask your husbands. Now, you don't have to look at her. I see him. He's looking over at her and say, well, you remind me. But we need to make sure that we hear, well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to actually follow up, or are we going to go in and say that we're willing to be silenced? Because I can tell you that each and every day, if we act together with God's blessing on this nation, what will happen is we will start to turn the tide. We will start to take back, indeed, the campuses who have become so anti-Semitic in this particular time that we need to stand up for them as well. We need to make sure of that. It is also time that we call terrorists for what they are. They are murderers, and it is time that they are brought to justice. It is time. So I'm going to go ahead and close with this. I want to encourage you as you come to Capitol Hill to be persistent, to make sure that you ask that member of Congress or that senator, that ask them what they're going to do for Israel and for the Jewish people. Because my wife and I, every day we wake up, we say, what are we going to do for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people today? Not what did we do yesterday, not what will we do tomorrow, but what will we do today? And I guess my question to you is, you're here today because it is a passion for you. It is something that you feel is important. But all we have to do is keep quiet, and evil will prevail. My wife and I were visiting Budapest, Hungary. And as we went, everywhere we go, we always try to engage and make sure that we take a clear message from the United States. And as we were there on official travel, we went down along the Danube. And the Danube there, if you can think about a time when, 7 million Jews were murdered, it was happening also in Hungary. And if you walk along the Danube, you can walk down there, and there's a memorial there that is to remind us of a horrific time when Jews were murdered, and it's called the Bronze Shoes. And those bronze shoes are there, and there's a number of bronze shoes that's all there is to the memorial on the edge of the Danube. But if you look at the rest of the story is quite compelling, and it calls us to action. Because the story is this: they would take 3 Jews down to the edge of the Danube. They would tie 3 of them together. They would shoot the 2 on the ends because they didn't want to waste the bullet on the one in the middle, and they would push them into the river. But before they did that, they would take off their shoes, because their shoes were seen as the only thing of value for their life. And I'm here this morning to say, as long as I have the privilege of serving in Congress and serving with you, never again will the most valuable thing about a Jewish life be their shoes. It is time that we stand up and take back this country. It is time. It is time. So I want to hear from each one of you. Are you willing to engage today? Are you willing to let the president hear it a few blocks from here? Are you willing to say, we are going to get involved and stay involved until ultimately the right thing is done and we stand by the nation of Israel? Are you ready to get it done? Are you ready to get it done? God bless you, God bless Israel, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you for letting me come. We love you.
Thank you, Congressman Meadows. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not even 9 a.m., okay? And this is where we're at already. I want to talk to you a little bit before our next speaker from the great state of Texas. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Christians United for Israel Action Fund. And I want to talk to you a little bit of everything that the Washington, D.C. office of Christians United for Israel has been able to accomplish because of you. Without the people in this room representing the more than 4.3 million members that we have across the nation, our staff would not be able to walk through the halls of Washington, D.C. and get a free cup of coffee. Because of you and the 4.3 million people that are represented by Christians United for Israel in this nation, and because of your action, we are able to do things like send 80,000 emails to the office of one senator that dares to attempt to pass an amendment that calls to cut financial military assistance to the state of Israel over the next 10 years. Because of you and the power that you all have and the fact that you are willing to engage, we were able to make sure that that amendment got no votes other than the senator himself that tried to pass it. Because of you, Mike Pompeo is now the Secretary of State of the United States of America. I don't know how many of you realize that Mike Pompeo was not supposed to make it out of the committee with a favorable ruling to become the Secretary of State. That would have been the first time that that happened since 1925. And it was nothing more than political theater as a way to publicly shame a deserving man that was more than qualified for the post, that as CIA director had been overwhelmingly voted in a bipartisan fashion. And so Christians United for Israel was called to act, because this is a man that not only is a friend to the state of Israel, but is guided in his faith for that friendship and sees it as an exercise of his faith to protect that friendship. So it was our job to have his back at the right time. Within the first few hours of engaging in our action alert, we sent over 10,000 emails to Congress on this issue. I think it's no coincidence that within the first few hours, we got the first vote from a Democrat that had previously said they would not be supporting Mr. Pompeo and said that they would be supporting Mr. Pompeo. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pompeo got out of committee with a favorable by one vote. These are the margins of victory that we're dealing with, but they are victories nonetheless, and they are because of you and your voice. I just want to say this to encourage you all to know that when you get those emails, when you get the calls, don't dismiss it. That is the power of your voice. That is what your congressmen and your senators need to see. That lets them know that you are watching and that you are holding them accountable for how they vote on these issues, for how they stand with the nation of Israel. That is important. Do not dismiss it. And for those of you that might feel uncomfortable with the concept of action, let me just touch briefly on some biblical examples of how you are to act, you are called to act on behalf of the state of Israel. Consider people that had access to power in the Bible, and then consider what they did with that power. Consider Moses, who had access to the Pharaoh. Consider Joseph, who had access to his Pharaoh. Consider Queen Esther, who was, of course, the wife of the king. They had access to the highest seats in power of the time. What matters is what they did with the access. As Mordecai reminded Esther, if you do not, who knows if you were put here just for this purpose. But if you don't act, somebody will. And if it's not you, then God will remember. Queen Esther, in her action, had purpose. She had passion for the Jewish people. They were her people. They were all going to be annihilated. No, there's no question that this woman had passion. But she took that passion and she focused that passion and she grounded that passion with purpose. She did not approach the king with a wish list. She did not approach a king and say, these are my demands, do it. She planned. She strategized. She threw a party. She made a meal. She said, did you like what you had tonight? Come back tomorrow. Let's keep talking. She had prudence. She had strategy. She knew that without that, her passion could be misinterpreted as being a zealot, as being extremist, as being emotional or overcome. That's not who we are, people. Yes, we are here as an exercise of our faith. Yes, we are here because Genesis says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. But we are not merely here to wave a flag, to sing Hatikva, to let Israel know that we love them, and we do, and that is important. But we are here to act because we are called to act. And if not us, who? And if not now, when? And I know I may be a little biased, but as I introduce our next speaker, I just have to, because I may never get this opportunity again. The stars at night are big and bright. Like, I just made a personal dream come true. Thank you. I am so pleased to introduce to you Senator Ted Cruz from the state of Texas.
Good morning. What a blessing for us to be together this morning. I come today to celebrate the resurrection. Now, as Christians, the resurrection is central to our faith and our salvation. But there is another resurrection that we are celebrating today. And by that I mean the resurrection and the restoration of the unshakable, of the unalterable, of the ironclad friendship between the United States and the State of Israel. We stand here this morning surrounded by prayer warriors. We stand here this morning surrounded by men and women who begin each day on your knees, lifting up our nation, lifting up the people of Israel, lifting up your brothers and sisters. And we would be remiss if we did not at least pause and reflect what a difference a couple of years can make. What a difference Ambassador Nikki Haley makes. What a difference Ambassador David Friedman makes. You know, it was just November and December of 2016, the end of the previous administration, when we saw the United Nations passing Resolution 2334, condemning, with the voice of the international community, condemning Israel as illegal occupiers, declaring the Jewish quarter of Israel illegally occupied, declaring the Western Wall illegally occupied, done with the acquiescence and energetic support of the Obama administration. It was only a year and a half ago we had the Secretary of State, John Kerry, describing Israel as an apartheid state. It was only a couple of years ago that we had members of Congress boycotting Prime Minister Netanyahu as he addressed a joint session of Congress. But oh, how the world has changed. This has been a year of celebration. Just a few months ago, I was so incredibly privileged, so incredibly humbled to be in Jerusalem for the opening of the United States Embassy. Many of you were there on the 70th anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. As we stood there dedicating that embassy, fulfilling a promise that we had seen presidents of both parties make. We'd seen Republicans make that promise, we'd seen Democrats make that promise, and yet when it came time for action, neither one followed through. But this year, America did follow through. I'll tell you the joy of being in Jerusalem, visiting with Israelis, visiting with Americans, particularly those of the generation that went through the Holocaust. The survivors that were still there that you would visit with tears in their eyes as they would look at you and say, I never, ever, ever thought this day would come. Now, I'll tell you, the decision to move the embassy was a perilous debate. Within the Trump administration, it divided the administration. Within the administration, you had certain voices at state, at defense, that argued, if we move the embassy, it will be provocative. If we move the embassy, the enemies of Israel will be unhappy. As compared to their usual state of happiness. And for a year and a half, a great battle waged within the administration as I and many other voices made the case to the president, this is the right thing to do. Every other nation on earth, our embassy is not in some other city, it's not in some other place, it is in the capital place. And in Israel, the capital place is the one and undivided and eternal city of Jerusalem. But the argument on the other side was that, well, this may make it harder to achieve peace. Now listen, every one of us longs to see peace in the Middle East. But what the men and women here gathered understand is that the obstacle to peace is not the people of Israel. Nobody wants peace more than the men and women of Israel because it is their babies who are being murdered as a result of the war. But I do not believe we will have peace so long as the Palestinian leadership, number one, refuses to acknowledge Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And number two, continues to embrace terrorism as a public policy to be advanced. With those preconditions in place, peace, I believe, is impossible until those are changed. But I'll tell you the case that I made to the president and the administration is I said, look, whatever the chances of peace are in the near term, in my view, moving the embassy increases the chances of peace. Why is that? Because it will be seen by our friends and our enemies alike as saying that America stands with Israel, period, the end. And what I encouraged the president, I said, you know, when we move the embassy, we can expect our Arab allies to disagree. We can expect them to disagree loudly. We can expect that they will believe for domestic political reasons that they have to do so. But at the same time, what I argued is I said, I believe quietly they will be deeply, deeply relieved. Because what I believe the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Jordanians will say when we move the embassy is, you know, a president and an American administration with enough backbone to move the embassy may well also have enough backbone to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. You know, I've joked retroactively, Barack Obama may well have deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. Because he managed to do something that nobody had been able to do for millennia, which is unify the Arabs and the Israelis. All you had to do is talk about giving the Iranians nuclear weapons. And suddenly everyone else said, "Are you out of your mind?" So that day of celebration when we opened the embassy was a new page in history. And I do not believe it was coincidental that that very same week we opened the embassy is the very same week that the United States finally withdrew from the disastrous Obama-Iranian nuclear deal. That, too, was a major battle within the administration. Indeed, the battle lines were much the same. State and defense, the same forces that were saying, don't move the embassy, were the forces saying, we got to keep the deal. And the same forces on the other side were making the case directly to the president that this deal is a disaster. That there is no greater threat to the safety and security of the United States of America, and there is no greater threat to the safety and security of Israel than the Ayatollah Khamenei with nuclear weapons. You know, I'm reminded of a political cartoon I saw some years ago. Had a picture of the Ayatollah saying, "Death to America!" And it had John Kerry responding saying, "Can I meet you halfway?" The reason for the threat is simple. When a religious zealot and extremist, when the Ayatollah stands and leads the mobs in chanting death to America and death to Israel, I believe him. I don't think those are simply empty rhetorics. I don't think he's simply looking for something else to put on the next bumper sticker. You know, the so-called father of the Iranian nuclear program, a nuclear scientist who has since gone to meet his maker, some say with an expedited trip provided by the Mossad, he had written into his last will and testament the following. He said when he died, he wished to be written on his tombstone, "Here lies a man who sought the annihilation of Israel." Now, I want you to think for a second about the deep, bilious hatred, the loathing, the rage that your entire life, everything you've done on this planet, you wish to be summed up. You want to be remembered for eternity for one thing: hatred of the Jews. When the Ayatollah chants death to America and death to Israel, when he describes Israel as the little Satan and America as the great Satan. If history teaches us anything, it is that when somebody tells you they want to kill you, believe them. And the shift we've seen in the Middle East when the Obama-Iran deal was signed, $150 billion flowing in to the Ayatollah and the mullahs, because what bad could happen with Ayatollahs with billions of dollars? You'll recall $1.7 billion flown in the dead of night on pallets of unmarked cash. By the way, you know, there's a legal term for that. That's called Indicia of Wrongdoing. Let me give you another example. Let's suppose you were selling your house, and I came to buy your house, and we went to the closing, and I said, you know what? I don't have a mortgage company. I don't even have a cashier's check to buy your house. I've got in the trunk 2 duffel bags of rolled up $20 bills with rubber bands around them. Now, would that maybe raise some red flags on your part? Who exactly is this guy, and why are we meeting again at 2 in the morning behind the Circle K? Well, that's essentially what the Obama-Iran deal was. We'll meet you behind the Circle K with $1.7 billion in unmarked cash. And what happens when you give terrorists billions of dollars? All right, here's a crazy concept. They use those billions of dollars to kill people. And we've seen the last couple of years Iran getting more and more aggressive. We've seen Iran moving Iranian soldiers into Syria. We've seen Iran sending drones into Israel. We've seen Iran funding radical Islamic terrorists in Yemen, throughout Africa, throughout the Middle East, even throughout Latin America. But what a difference cutting off the cash makes. And I, for one, am thankful that we have a president and an administration who understands a simple and powerful truth, that Israel is our friend. And that the Ayatollah Khamenei should never, ever, ever be allowed to have nuclear weapons, that they will stop or we will stop them. There are battles that will continue. There are battles against BDS. There are battles against human shields, including the legislation I'm introducing this week to go against human shields. These battles will continue for some time, but I want this morning for us just to take a moment and pause and reflect and say, thank you, God. Thank you for the tremendous improvement we have seen, and thank you for the faithfulness of the brothers and sisters gathered here who pray for Israel, who pray for America, and who lift us up. God bless you. At Passover every year, we say next year in Jerusalem. Well, I am so happy to be able to say this year in Jerusalem. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. The next two speakers that we're about to present worked tirelessly alongside of Christians United for Israel this past legislative year as we focused all of our efforts on the passage of the Taylor Force Act. Congressman Lamborn is the U.S. representative for the 5th Congressional District in Colorado. Go ahead, Colorado. Go ahead, Colorado. It's okay. He is on the House Armed Services Committee and House Natural Resources Committee. From fighting for increased missile defense funding and counter-tunneling cooperation on the House Armed Service Committee, to being a co-chair of the 2 largest pro-Israel caucuses in Congress, he is a consistent advocate for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship on Capitol Hill. In the 115th Congress, he also introduced the United Nations Review and Accounting Act, which restricts UN funding until we know how American taxpayer dollars are being spent. Yes, indeed. He is also a co-sponsor of many bills that support Israel, like the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, which directs U.S. policy in dealings with international government organizations that boycott Israel, and has written and signed onto many congressional letters, including letters of the President Trump and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, urging the administration to keep their promise to the United States and each of you to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel, the eternal capital of Jerusalem. To Jerusalem, Israel's eternal capital. We've said that a few times, people. Congressman Lamborn was the original House sponsor of the Taylor Force Act. Yes. This stopped U.S. taxpayer dollars from going to the Palestinian Authority until Palestinians stopped paying terrorists to kill innocents. And Stuart Force, the father of Taylor Force, is here today and would like to take this opportunity to honor the congressman for his efforts on behalf of his son. Please, will you make welcome Congressman Lamborn and Stuart Force.
Good morning again. I found out about 3 minutes ago that we'd have the chance to introduce Congressman Lamborn, and they said, "Is that okay?" And I said, "Of course it is." I referred to my beautiful wife, Rob, yesterday. Here she is in person, so. I will keep it very brief. When this whole process started, and we found out Congressman Lamborn was the lead sponsor of the legislation, and then we saw he and his staff in action, we knew we hit the jackpot. We knew that this was going to happen. And Robbie and I so appreciate the respect and dignity that he and his staff have shown us over the last year and a half. And we are very fortunate to not only be with him on stage, but to consider he and his wife, Jeannie, and everybody we've met, our friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Aren't they great? Aren't they great? Haven't we read somewhere before where it says that he can turn a curse into a blessing? That's exactly what's happened in the life of their son, who was tragically taken away. So thank you, Robbie and Stuart. Well, good morning, CUFI. I'm thrilled to be here with some of the best supporters of Israel in the entire country. You're bringing more people into the fold than ever before, and that's fantastic. I represent the 5th District of Colorado. I think there's some people here from Colorado this morning. That's great, that's great. With 4.3 million members, CUFI is becoming a force to be reckoned with, and that's fantastic. And so, Pastor Hagee, keep up your great work. It's been great to work with you and your entire team, Sandy, David Brogg, Alexandria, Pelosi, and others. So keep up the good work, and I'm here to announce something that I think maybe we can work on and will work on together. I'm someone who believes that God has given Israel to the Jews. I go back to Genesis 12:3, where God said to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And that was true then, and it's true now. It's true for individuals, and it's true for countries. So one of my missions in Congress is to make sure that the United States continues to support Israel. I think the blessings we've enjoyed as a country are due in no small part to that loyalty that we've shown. We were the first country to recognize Israel in 1948, 11 minutes after it was created. And it's not just a one-way street. We benefit from a lot of the things that the Israelis have produced, the technology and the other things, the geopolitical strategic alliance that we have with the only democracy in the Middle East. And I've been to Israel 7 times, and I've seen up close and personal all the challenges that we're facing. I have the opportunity to be on the Armed Services Committee, so I have an opportunity, and I've done this for years, to help build joint military projects like missile defense, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. I was the one who introduced legislation to have the defeating and detection of tunnels. Tunnels is now, unfortunately, a strategic threat against Israel. Last year, as you just heard, I was the House sponsor of the Taylor-Force Act, along with Senator Lindsey Graham in the Senate. And we got it put into the omnibus. It's going to do great work to help save lives. We got to keep our hard-earned taxpayer money from going to terrorist organizations that promote and incentivize and pay terrorism. Some people say pay to slay, and that's wrong. And I want to thank also President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence for keeping the promise of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So we've got some great victories under our belt. But as Pastor John Hagee has said, full steam ahead, because we have to open up new fronts. And I want to tell you about an exciting and overdue new front that we need to open up, and I'm going to tell you about it this morning. There is a scandalous UN agency. Now, that's nothing new to hear that. It's called Unruh, United Nations Relief and Works Organization. And their original mission was to help resettle the refugees who were created in the conflict of 1948, which was created when Arab countries invaded Israel, not the other way around. After 70 years of so-called resettling, UNRWA says there are now 5.3 million refugees, Palestinian refugees, some of them born here in the United States, some of them living in Los Angeles, living all over the world, but according to their calculations, we're talking about 5.3 million refugees, and they all have a right of return. The Palestinians, according to them, have a right of return to overwhelm and take over Israel, I guess. I don't know. In 2015, Congress directed the State Department to write a report on what the actual number of refugees was, those who were there in 1948 and are living to this day in some kind of undefined status. And it's a much smaller number than 5.3 million, let me tell you. But we don't know that exact number because President Obama classified the results of that report. He didn't want the truth to come out. I sent a letter with about 40 other people to the president saying, release that report. We need to know what that number is. Now, the U.S. does give humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. Some of them are unfortunately caught up in violence, corruption, and their lives are miserable. And our hearts go out to those who are suffering in misery, and we should help them with food, medicine, and things like that. But we need UNRWA to go back to its original mission. So I have introduced a bill, H.R. 6451, the UNRWA Reform and Refugee Support Act, and I want to work with you to get this put into law. This bill is a first step to reforming UNRWA. Palestinians in Gaza are not all refugees under the United Nations definition. So, in fact, UNRWA has done some horrible things like promoting the textbooks that teach anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism to the impressionable young children growing up in the Palestinian areas. And UNRWA needs to be disciplined just for that alone. So, their twisted definition of what is a refugee is making a mockery of the true refugee crises around the world. Look at the Syrian issue. Look at Burma. Look at the horrible displacements that are taking place around the world, where there are true refugees who need to be resettled until they can go back possibly, or just stay resettled if that's what they want. So we want to continue helping the humanitarian efforts, but we want UNRWA to get back to its original mission, and that's what H.R. 6451 will do. So I want to work with you to accomplish that. Like Pastor John Hagee says, we've had some victories, but we need to open up new fronts. This is a new front. And so with you, I want to say full steam ahead. It will save the U.S. possibly hundreds of millions of dollars. We have about $333 million going to UNRWA right now, 1/4 of its entire budget. And we need them to just get back to their original mission, focus on the true refugees, many of which are in their 70s or 80s by now. That's what they need to get back to. So I go to a verse I think you all are very familiar with in Isaiah 62:1. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet till her righteousness shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. So I'm going to work with you. We're going to be a blazing torch, and we're going to shed the light on what needs to happen in the Middle East and what the truth is. Thank you so much, and God bless CUFI.
Thank you, Congressman Lamborn. Our next senator needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. Senator Lindsey Graham is a champion for Israel and a champion for Christians United for Israel. The senator from South Carolina, he spent 33 years, go ahead, South Carolina, we're all about state pride here, we're united. He spent 33 years serving as a lawyer in the U.S. military, both in the Air Force and the Air National Guard, even after being elected to Congress. After first serving in the U.S. House of Representatives for 8 years, for the last 15 years, Senator Graham has focused on national security and U.S. foreign relations while representing South Carolina in the Senate. He has been a steadfast friend to Israel throughout his career and has worked closely with CUFI for several years to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship and defend both countries from their mutual enemies. As one of the most respected and influential foreign policy experts on Capitol Hill, Senator Graham sponsored the Taylor Force Act of 2017 and played the crucial role in getting that legislation passed through the Senate. Thank you, Senator Graham. During Operation Protective Edge, Senator Graham sponsored a Senate resolution expressing full support for Israel's right to defend itself and condemning the Hamas rocket attacks against Israeli citizens. In addition, Senator Graham co-sponsored a 2014 bill in the Senate seeking to prevent Hezbollah from receiving international financing, as well as a bill in 2017 designed to oppose international attempts to inflict boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Yes. Senator Lindsey Graham clearly recognizes the threats that Israel and the United States face and understands that working closely together and tirelessly ensures that both countries have a safer and a brighter future. Once again, the Force family would like to join the senator on stage to acknowledge his leadership and support in ending pay to slay against their son, Taylor Force, and future victims of Palestinian terror. We say no more. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Graham and the Force family.
I promise this is it. This is 6 months, you may see me again, but I think when we moved to South Carolina 7 years ago, just out of the blue after we retired, it wasn't a coincidence that Senator Lindsey Graham is our one of our U.S. senators. I think it was Providence. He has done so much good during his time serving the United States and as our senator and as the lead sponsor for the Taylor Force Act in the Senate. It is Providence, and he is a good friend of South Carolina and the United States and Israel and the forces. Thank you.
Sit down. Thank you all very much. I've been well introduced, haven't I? You've had a lot to shout about, right? Last night was awesome. So I want to give you something to think about. My goal is not to get you shouting too much and save it for later on. The first thing I want to say is that when I met the Taylor Force family, Stuart and Robbie, it really moved me because such a senseless death. Have you heard the Taylor Force story? He's exactly who you'd want to be your son. West Point graduate, 2 tours of duty, 1 in Iraq and Afghanistan, going to school, finds his way to Israel, studying in a graduate program there, goes out to eat with a bunch of friends and gets killed for no reason at all. So here's what I told them. We're going to make sure he did not die in vain, and we have fulfilled that promise. This young man's death did more to focus on the problem than any single event since I've been up here for over 20 years. So how do you get to where we're at on moving the embassy to Jerusalem and the Taylor Force Act and some of the other accomplishments? You got to get Congress to respond. The one thing I found that we respond to is passionate people. Every bill is a jobs bill in Congress. Your job. You worry about how you vote. You want to stay in good standing with the people you represent. To all of you in the room, how many of you are going to go to Capitol Hill later today? It makes a big difference. Pastor Hagee and his whole team has focused on the U.S.-Israel relationship in the evangelical Christian community unlike anybody in my lifetime. This whole organization is a result of an intense focus that our nation needs to be with Israel for a lot of reasons, religious reasons, national security reasons, just a lot of reasons. How does these bills become law? The Taylor Force family took the tragedy and turned it into something positive. They met so many members of the Senate. How would you like to meet those two and tell them, no, I'm not going to support this legislation? You can't. Now, when you come to Capitol Hill and you go into these offices, you need to be prepared. You need to tell them exactly what you want. We're in a town, you get what you want only if you know what you're asking for. And you have to be insistent. No is not the right answer. So the bottom line is I meet people every day, every 15 minutes, and most of them are paid lobbyists or good people. And they come with a very clear message about their client. It's usually some business interest. Seldom do I meet people who come up here on their own dime and have a reason to be here that is very passionate, that doesn't affect their own self-interest in an economic way. None of you up here because it pays well to support Israel. You're up here to try to move your nation in the right direction. It is working. It is working. So the Taylor Force law, after a lot of persistence by Pastor Hagee, his team, and people in this room, we got the president's attention, and without Donald Trump, this law would not be in being. So thank you, President Trump. Without President Trump, the embassy would not have moved. What is it about the times that we live in? Finally, your voice is listened to. Do you understand? For the last 8 years, nobody really gave a damn what you thought up here. Now they do. Now this window could close. So work like there's no tomorrow. Now, the Palestinians have gotten the wrong message. They've become very defiant in the face of the Taylor Force Act. They've actually increased the payments to people who engage in terrorism. So what will I do next? I'm going to introduce round 2 of Taylor Force, and I'll need your help, to punish the ministers who actually carry out the new Palestinian law that incentivizes more that the young people commit terrorism, not less. And we want to let them know they're not going to travel the world to come to the United States or live well, that we're going to consider them agents of terrorism. We're going to name names. So, and they will listen. What have I learned about the Mideast after 44 trips in the last 10 years? You need a wallet and a gun, and we got both. But the main thing you need is passion. So that's where we're headed on Taylor Force. In the next 3 or 4 minutes, no longer than 5, I got other speakers like John Cornyn, who's awesome, Iran. The biggest challenge of the times we live in is to contain this Iranian regime before it's too late. I'm going to name 5 threats to you. You got China that I'll put over here by itself. It's an economic threat. It could be a military threat, but it also could be a partner. We don't know where China's going. I'm going to work with Trump to get him in a good place. You got radical Islam on the Sunni side, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. These guys are crazy. The only way you can fight them is to fight them over there so they don't come here. So let's don't withdraw our troops. Let's keep the fight over there, right? Here's the good news. Most people in that world are not buying what these crazy people are selling. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan 44 times. Most fathers and mothers do not want to give their daughters to ISIS unless they have to. So here's the good news for us. Most people are rejecting the ideology. We just need to build them up. We need to offer a hopeful life to compete with a glorious death. That means we've got to show up in Afghanistan and Iraq, and means we've got to stay in and try to improve life. That makes us safer. They're a threat, but we're going to win that threat. You got Russia. It's a gas station masquerading as a country. Putin's just a thug, nothing new there. He's trying to recreate the old Russian Empire, and he'll fail. And one day they'll throw him out because he's robbing them blind. You got North Korea, Little Rocket Man, right? Little Rocket Man cares about one thing, Little Rocket Man. And the Donald has made Little Rocket Man think twice about, oh my God. So I don't worry about North Korea trying to take over the world. I do worry about them selling nuclear weapons. They've done it in the past with every other weapon. So Trump is right to try to get them to give up their nukes. And he's right to say, we're not here to take over North Korea. We're here to just make sure you can't have nuclear weapons to use or sell. Iran. Of all the threats I've just named, this is the big one. Why? You have a nation state, not a terrorist organization, motivated by a religious view that would kill everybody in this room. Just like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but they're Sunnis. The Ayatollah is a religious Nazi. When you write death to Israel on a missile, it's pretty clear to me what you're trying to tell the world. So this regime, if allowed to get a nuclear weapon, how many of you think they would use it? Me too. More than North Korea, because they're motivated by a view of religion that requires them to wipe off the face of the earth, Israel, and come after the great Satan, us. And for 8 years, we've been kissing their ass, and I'm tired of that. So now, we got a new way of doing business. We got a new sheriff in town. Only I can get away with doing that and a bunch of Christians, but I'm a Baptist and we do this routinely at home. So, no good sermon goes without a little bit of cussing. But it makes the point, doesn't it? Here's the point. Donald Trump, you've got it right when it comes to Iran. Obama, you got it wrong, and we're going to do things different. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to form a new chapter, Christians United for the Iranian People, called CUFI, I guess. We're going to stand by the Iranian people and say, you're right to want a better life, and we're there with you. Remember that young lady who was shot down in the streets, died in the streets of Tehran, just wanting a better life, wanting to be able to have her vote count? Remember the protesters having a sign, Mr. President Obama, are you with them or are you with us? Well, let me tell you where Donald Trump is at. He's with you. He's not with the regime. And here's where we're going to be. I'm going to introduce legislation soon that sides with the Iranian people against the Ayatollah and his henchmen, and I need your support to make that a law. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to treat the Iranian regime the way Ronald Reagan treated the Soviet Union. It is an evil empire, and it will fall. If you care about Israel, which all of us do, of all the threats they face, it's the Ayatollah with a nuke because he'll use it. One Holocaust is enough. So we got a chance in world history to change things. So when Mike Pompeo 2 days ago made a speech about how corrupt Iran is, and it will be the policy of the United States to stand up to the regime and stand by the Iranian people, I hope you understand that was history being made. We're treating Iran the way Reagan treated the Soviet Union. We're going to break the Iranian regime's back economically. We're going to drive them out of Syria, not let them stay. We're going to partner with Israel to destroy Hamas and Hezbollah on their doorstep. We're going to do everything we can to let the Iranian people that we hear you. We're going to bring this regime down to its knees. God bless you.
I know he's from South Carolina, but all you can say is yee-haw. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, our next speaker is as local as they come. San Antonio, Texas, where are you? Senator John Cornyn has served the people of the state of Texas for the last 3 decades. First as a district judge, and later as a member of the Texas Supreme Court, and then, if that wasn't enough, as Attorney General of the state of Texas. A graduate from Trinity University, go Tigers, and St. Mary's Law School, he also received his master's in law from the University of Virginia Law School. First elected to the Senate in 2002, he was elected by his peers after his 3rd term to serve as the majority whip, a position that gives the great state of Texas a very powerful voice at Congress's leadership table. He is the second highest ranking position in the Senate Republican Conference, and he sits on the Senate Finance, Intelligence, and Judiciary Committees. The senator has been a faithful supporter of Israel through legislation including the Jerusalem Embassy Recognition Act, Combating BDS Act, Israel Anti-Boycott Act, and the Taylor Force Act. Please welcome a servant of the great state of Texas and a friend of Christians United for Israel, Senator John Cornyn.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for that wonderful reception, and it's an honor to be back to speak with you again this year. I told my friend Lindsey Graham I wish they had scheduled me at a different time, though, because Lindsey Graham is a hard guy to follow, as you might imagine. Just consider me the straight man in the deal, okay? Well, I know my colleague Senator Cruz was here earlier, and another proud Texan. By the way, how many Texans do we have in the audience today? Can I see a show of hands? Well, speaking of Texas, I want to thank one in particular, and that is Pastor Hagee. Pastor Hagee and his wife Diana have done tireless work uniting millions of people across this country, and without him, of course, we wouldn't be here today without his leadership. Let's give him a round of applause again. So since founding Citizens United for Israel 10 years ago, Citizens United has continued to grow in membership and influence. And I'm grateful for John's and your influence, as you've heard, on the legislation and actions we've been able to take on behalf of the United States government in support of our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel. You are the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States. So it's no wonder why the late, great Dr. Charles Krauthammer called you the single group most important to Israel in the United States. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu said he considers Citizens United for Israel a vital part of Israel's national security. So when I spoke to you in the past, a different president was in office. We had an administration that seemed ambivalent about the partnership between Israel and the United States. But then something changed. Elections, as they say, have consequences. It was so unexpected that it resulted in a true paradigm shift. President Trump won the presidency. When I spoke to you last year, he was just 6 months into his first term, but we've now had a chance to see some real attitudes change toward Israel for the better. The trend has continued in the time since. Over the last year, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have strengthened the ties that bind our two countries. We saw this when President Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, a bold decision that many presidents had said we should do, but only this president actually got it done. The timing, as I'm sure you will remember, coincided with the 70th anniversary of the creation of the Jewish state. The move was a landmark event and one that was long overdue. But it's not just the embassy. There are other ways our partnership has been bolstered over this past year under President Trump and, I might add, Republicans in Congress. I'd like to touch briefly on these steps and mention others that we still need to take to create an even stronger U.S.-Israel alliance. I might add, when I say a Republican-led conference, that is a matter of fact, but it's not to diminish the importance of trying to make our support for Israel a bipartisan priority. Well, the first thing that President Trump did was address the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, which was entered into by President Obama without congressional approval. The terms of the deal, I believe, were truly disastrous. And that's why President Trump did the right thing, in my view, and shredded it. After all, it did absolutely nothing to make our allies, including Israel, more safe and secure. It did nothing to stop Iran's investment in terrorism around the world as the leading state sponsor of international terrorism. And in fact, it helped fuel that terrorism, generating new cash that Iran could use to subsidize its death and destruction. Plain and simple, it was a bad deal from the start. The Obama administration failed to keep our closest ally in the region informed and sold it to the American people as something far more substantial than it really was. The reality is the agreement did not curb Iran's involvement in Syria, as we've seen, or Yemen. And all three countries have continued to be threats in the region. And Iran has continued to spread its poisonous ideology throughout the region and beyond. In fact, Iran not only violated the terms of the deal, it also disregarded UN Security Council resolutions. President Obama acknowledged something that you and I know well. I should say President Obama never acknowledged it, and that is Iran will never negotiate in good faith. Never. As I said, President Trump did the right thing by pulling the plug on the deal. Any new agreement our country enters into must prevent Iran from developing weapons of mass destruction, not just delaying it, preventing it. Another step we need to take is in the Senate. Building on the President's own efforts, my colleagues and I need to continue to do our part to hold Iran's feet to the fire. Part of that involves passing a bipartisan bill I've introduced that targets Mahan Air, Iran's largest commercial airline, which also supports its efforts with the Quds Force, an elite unit of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and Hezbollah as well. This airline is the primary way in which terrorist personnel and weapons are spread to places like Syria and Lebanon, presenting a clear danger to the security of Israel. That's an unacceptable condition that my bill changes, and I hope we'll pass this bill with your support in a larger package soon. So when you're on the Hill today, I hope you will encourage each of the senators and congressmen you talk to put Mahan Air out of business. Iran's not the only threat that Israel faces in the Middle East. We continue to see the threats from the Assad regime in Syria and hear persistent calls to carry out attacks on Israel. These are destabilizing forces, to be sure, that we're trying to address through strategic defense cooperation. Recently, I co-sponsored a bill called the United States-Israel Security Assistance Act, which, as many of you know, authorizes foreign military financing for Israel over a 10-year period, pursuant to our Memorandum of Understanding signed between our two countries. It also reiterates U.S. policy ensuring Israel's qualitative military edge. Israel received more than $3 billion annually, and this represents a strong commitment to the defense needs of our ally, and it's critical that our fellow democracy remains safe amid regional instability. In addition to defense funding, my colleagues and I in the Senate are hard at work on legislation that focuses on the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. For example, Senator Hatch from Utah and I are working on a bill that supports protesters fighting for freedom and prosperity in Iran, as you heard Senator Graham allude to, and urges the President to condemn the government of Iran for its chronic human rights abuses. And finally, as you know, and I know has been discussed, it's the Taylor Force Act, which was signed into law a few months ago, which cuts off aid to the West Bank and Gaza, and unless and until the State Department certifies that the Palestinian Authority has stopped paying for acts of terrorism and have taken verifiable steps to end the violence. I just want to close by re-emphasizing something I said at the beginning, and that is how important your influence here is in Washington. I know you don't come here for the money. In fact, you come here at your personal expense. You don't come here for the glory, because there are those who will vilify you for your advocacy for Israel. But I just want to say it is a clear demonstration of our commitment, all of our commitment, to the long enduring partnership between our two countries. And as many urgent threats from around the world compete for our attention these days, and it seems like everything competes for our attention every 15 minutes or so, we need to keep focused on the cultural, religious, and political ties shared by the United States and Israel, and recognize that they are unique and unbreakable. Your group serves as a powerful reminder of this bond, but you're much more than just that. You're not afraid to fight. Citizens United for Israel has adopted the same strategy as the Israeli Defense Forces. Always meet the enemy with speed, resourcefulness, and innovation. And I'm here today to tell you, don't stop fighting. And I know you won't. Stay engaged. Israel and the United States are stronger when we stand together. This is something that each one of you here understands. So keep up the good work. May God bless you. May God bless the United States of America and the nation of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Well, are you guys ready to hear from someone from the White House? Yes. I am so happy to announce that we have with us this morning Paul Teller, Special Assistant to the President of the United States for Legislative Affairs. Paul comes from a Jewish family and grew up in Long Island, New York, where he is the lone conservative voice at the Thanksgiving table. He has a distinguished background. From his time on Capitol Hill to his current position with the executive office, he continuously works to unite outside groups with officials at the highest levels of our government. Paul is the former chief of staff to Senator Ted Cruz and former executive director of the United States House of Representatives Republican Study Committee. Within the administration, Paul is a special assistant to the president for legislative affairs. In 2010, the Washington Post described Paul as one of the most influential conservative aides in Congress. And in 2012 and 13, The Hill named Mr. Teller as one of its fabulous 50 Hill staffers. And during his time with Senator Cruz, the publication also gave him the designation of agitator-in-chief. Must be why we get along so well. It is clear that Mr. Teller stands firm-footed with his values and follows his conscience while working at the highest levels within our government. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome from the White House, Mr. Paul Teller.
Hey, guys. How are you? How are you? I will be brief today because you've already heard from some fantastic speakers, including my former boss, Ted Cruz, Senator Graham, Senator Corner, and I know others. But I just wanted to really bring a brief hello to you from a certain person maybe you've heard before, President Donald Trump. Appreciate it. It is a true privilege to work for him. And by the way, I should say it's a true privilege to be here with CUFI today and with all of you. I was talking with some of the staff backstage that when they said, can you come meet with some CUFI folks? Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to give them a quick update. I walked in, I said, oh my God, there's thousands of people in here. This is unbelievable. And it's fantastic to see. And another thing we were talking about backstage, the reason it's so important to see, let me give you just a really brief history of myself. Not that it's super important, but just to give you the background of kind of why it's important for me to be standing here. So I'm a New York Jew. Why does that matter? That matters because I grew up in a, you can imagine, less than conservative environment, right? even my Jewish friends and family, God bless them, aren't the biggest fans of Israel. You've probably heard that, right? That in liberal Jewish circles, we still have some work to do. That's kind of what I came out of, and yet became this, like, you know, as they said, agitator-in-chief, conservative Zionist, working through the halls of Capitol Hill, which I should explain more of, too. So I was privileged to start back on the Hill in 2000. Just a year later, worked for this group called the Republican Study Committee, which you may have heard of. It still exists today. It's the one of the conservative caucuses in Congress. Back then, it really was kind of the troublemaker caucus. So it was a perfect place, you know, for me to go and just militantly pro-Israel folks. In fact, some of the chairmen I've worked for are folks you may have heard of, you know, low visibility names like Mike Pence. I've worked for him. Jim Jordan, you may have heard of, right? Tom Price, all of these fantastic leaders, Jeb Hensarling, et cetera. So many other great leaders I was privileged to work for. And always worked with allies on the outside to amplify our inside game. In other words, we realized very soon at the RSC, if we're gonna have any success for Israel, or really anything, we've got to work with citizens groups and individual citizens on the outside. If we just talk to ourselves inside the bubble in the Beltway, it wasn't going to work, it didn't work, and so we kind of learned the lesson quickly that you have a better inside game, we have a better outside game. Took that belief and role over to Senator Cruz's office, was privileged to work for him as his deputy chief in chief, including when he ran for president. It was an amazing, amazing experience, and I don't know that you're gonna find a more pro-Israel, staunchly, repeatedly, consistently pro-Israel senator than Senator Ted Cruz. I'm glad you heard from him today. And then all this leads to, again, what I'm privileged to do now, this role in the White House. The formal title, Special Assistant to the President for Legislative Affairs. In English, what that means, so I'm in the Legislative Affairs shop, the shop that has relations with Congress, with many of the members you saw and heard from today. But specifically, they've got me outreaching to the conservative world, the right-of-center world, if you will. Mostly folks like, let's say, the Freedom Caucus folks on the House side, also the RSC, you've heard of the Freedom Caucus. On the Senate side, folks like Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Tom Cotton, those kinds of senators. But also, and this is what makes this unique, and this is what one of the points I wanted to make about this president and this White House, in that same role, I'm also charged with outreach to conservative groups. And it's really across the board. It's not just certain issue sets. It's national security conservatives, economic conservatives, social conservatives, and of course, wherever they intersect, like at a group called, you know, CUFI. So think about how important that is, right? Because, you know, any president could have a conservative person in the White House doing busy work, this, that, and the other thing. This president, this White House, this vice president has a conservative outreach person in the Legislative Affairs shop doing House, Senate, and the conservative groups, citizens groups, all in one, because that is so important to advancing the legislative agenda. Collaborating, partnering with outside groups, individual citizens like yourself, to help advance the president's legislative agenda is critical, and I would say unique to this White House. Privileged to be a part of that, and thank you for your help with everything each day. And it's also a White House where we don't have to hide our pro-Israel stance. In fact, if any of you want to come for a little visit, I'm privileged to be over and have a little office in the East Wing. It's not glamorous, but look, it's there, it's fine, you know, no complaints. And every time I bring folks, especially folks who visit from Israel, they laugh because it's become this kind of Zionist, shelter. I've got a big sign, Trump is a friend of Zion. Some of you have seen those over in Israel. I've got a hat that says, you know, build Israel great again. So there's just a variety of things that exist. So just know each day that those things are in the White House. We have people and friends and allies in the White House. And that's the thing. It's not rare. We are not rare in the White House, pro-Israel folks. We are everywhere in this White House, even in shops. Even in divisions of the White House that have nothing to do with Israel, they're still pro-Israel folks. So it is so easy to just speak freely of our positions there. And I should ask you guys, are you sick of winning yet? By the way, no. We should keep going. Okay, all right. No, that's good because look, just a couple of very, very brief things to point out. These are all things you know, but you can't not say it if you're coming for a quick hello from the White House. Obviously, the move of the embassy. What do we think? That was good? That was just a huge privilege to be a part of that. And that's something, frankly, we've been pushing on from the Capitol Hill perspective. When I worked for Mike Pence back in 2005, we were pushing that. And to see that finally happen, to have a president who just says, this is the right thing to do. Jerusalem is the capital. We should have our U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. It's just amazing. It's just fantastic. And look, frankly, but it's just the next step, right? It's a wonderful expression of our growing alliance between this president, this vice president, Prime Minister Netanyahu, between America and Israel. And there's more to do, and frankly, I'm looking forward to, I know this isn't quite the setting, but when we get together in smaller groups, I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, what should the next steps be? What do we do next? Obviously, we should look forward to making the embassy a permanent structure. That's underway. But we'd just love your thoughts on things like that. And like I said, that's what we do every day in this White House, is constantly outreaching to real America, reaching outside the Beltway to hear what you want, to hear what you think, and to use those things to energize us, motivate us, and get things done. The other element, and you've heard a lot about this from your previous speakers, is of course this president's posture on Iran. And it's just, again, what a pleasure to work for a man, for a vice president, for a White House that feels this way and expresses it so clearly and consistently. You may have seen a tweet the other day, by the way. I mean, that was fantastic. Another thing, hopefully you did not miss it. If you did, I'd be happy to send it to you. Secretary Pompeo's speech in California at the Reagan Library. If you have not seen that, it was, I believe, Sunday. I'll get it to you. Basically, he was speaking to the people of Iran and saying, our problem is with the regime, not the people. We hear you, we feel for you, we know you want freedom, and we're going to help. It's a fantastic speech. It was just fantastic. So we, the president's number one priority really is to just choke this regime, is to just make sure the economic pressure, the political pressure, the social pressure continues. We need your help with that. So that's call to action there. Continue that pressure. Keep it up. We hear you, and keep it coming. Just keep it coming. And so one little somber note, and maybe also an action item. I was privileged to have been over in Jerusalem for the embassy ceremony. My first time to Israel, actually, after all these years. I'd never been to Israel. My first time was for this embassy transfer. Unbelievable. But the but that comes with it, when I looked around, not a single Democrat member of Congress made it to that event. And that's a shame, right? Because this should be a bipartisan issue, right? This should be something we as Americans all agree on. And it wasn't for lack of being asked. I've talked face-to-face with members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who said, I asked dozens of my Democrat colleagues to come. They didn't come. They just said, well, I guess that would somehow give a win to this president. And very unfortunate. So maybe that's a call to action as well, is that any of us who do have ties, connections into Democrat offices, let's bring them back in the fold on Israel. I think that would be a really fantastic thing to do. So with that, I've already taken up too much of your time, but I just wanted to say, again, hello, thank you, we hear you. Be of good cheer. That's the thing. There are folks on the left, there are folks on the anti-Israel, left, right, center, whatever, who are coming after us, right? They don't want us to exist. They certainly don't want us to speak. Well, we're here, and we're speaking, and let's just be as loud and as consistent as we possibly can. And I look forward to our ongoing collaboration. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you. Thank you.
You may not realize the impact you have when you attend the Christians United for Israel National Summit in Washington, D.C., July 23rd, 24th. Let me tell you what happens in the minds of your elected officials when you, their constituent, show up in their Washington offices. To put it lightly, there's an explosion of energy that happens that breaks the Richter scale. For each person standing in that office, saying that Israel matters to you and you're paying attention to how that congressman votes, they know there are tens of thousands more voters at home just like you. And that gets their absolute attention. When you show up in Washington, D.C. to tell them face to face that you support Israel, one of two things happens in that office. If your member of Congress is already pro-Israel, they get supercharged with the boldness and focus on making the U.S.-Israel relationship their top priority. If your member of Congress is not supporting Israel, your presence makes them aware of what will happen at the ballot box on Election Day. And that will be enough to get that congressman or senator to be more supportive of Israel. Congress knows that CUFI speaks for millions of American Christians, but Washington is famous for its gridlock. Your voice has the power to shake things up and push pro-Israel legislation to the top of the agenda. Your voice and your presence on Capitol Hill will have an exponential impact. When Christians United for Israel gathers in the nation's capital for the CUFI DC Summit, you are irreplaceable. In the words of Mordecai to Queen Esther, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Make sure your voice is heard.
I just wanted to say, just because you see that bright and shiny video, don't think that Pastor Hagee's not here. He is backstage, and he is overblown by the enthusiasm and the energy that this room has for our members of Congress after the night last night to be in here bright and early at 8 a.m. cheering everybody on. So thank you so much. For those of you that may not know me, I knew that applause was not for me. You notice how quickly I turned around.
God bless each and every one of you for being here, because when these senators walk out here and see this unity and see this organization and see the quality and substance about what we're saying, the word of CUFI is spreading across Capitol Hill like a prairie fire. We are the point on the spear right now. You are making it happen. God bless you for every sacrifice you have made and are making and will make. Full steam ahead.
Feel like we just made a new t-shirt. Ladies and gentlemen, this begins our talking point session. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you need to sharpen your pencils and your minds. It all comes down to what you're about to hear from David Bragg as you approach your representatives, your senators, with our agenda. And we pray the favor of Esther and the wisdom of Solomon upon you as you do that. For those of you that may not know me, my name is Sandra Parker, and I am pleased to be the chairwoman of the CUFI Action Fund. I have the pleasure of working alongside our Washington, D.C. staff as we endeavor to ensure that your collective voices are heard at the highest levels in Washington, D.C. Since its inception, it's your dedication that has earned this organization the reputation of being stocked with active members that effectively move the needle in our nation on behalf of the Jewish state and its causes. For years, each of you have been a member of the army standing at the ready, a spear in defense of Israel. And now with CUFI Action Fund, we are humbled to act as your spearhead, carrying the message to our leaders that yours is a voice that is to be both heard and reckoned with. And now I would like to introduce our Washington director, Gary Bauer, as he comes to give you an update before David Brogg brings the talking points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. What a conference, right? Has this been unbelievable? I was listening to my old friend Laura Ingraham yesterday. Kind of a colorful speech there with some colorful language, and then Senator Lindsey Graham today, kind of plowed some new territory there, and. I said to Pastor Hagee backstage, if I knew that it was okay to cuss during speeches at CUFI, I would have been cussing during the last 8 years before this president. Let me quickly just say, in case some of you aren't familiar with this, the difference between CUFI and the CUFI Action Fund. They're both different groups because of tax laws and political laws. CUFI is what's called a 501c3 nonprofit group, and it can educate people and educate members of Congress. And we do that, and we follow those rules. But at the end of the day in this town, you've got to be able to make a member of Congress worry about their own future employment. And to do that, you have to have what's called a 501c4 that can do more in lobbying and more in the political conversation that takes place every 2 and 4 years. So the Action Fund is doing that, and we are being noticed, and it's all because of you. Look, I want to begin by giving you some additional good news. There are commissions, as I'm sure you know, all over Washington, D.C. Most of them, quite frankly, are a little silly or deal with issues that really don't mean very much. But there's a handful of commissions in town that are important. One of them is the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. The other day, President Trump had the opportunity to make a presidential appointment to that commission, which gives our folks a clear majority on it. And he appointed an unbelievable guy that I think will make a real difference, me. Thank you. Thank you very much. As you can see, my family is sitting here in the front rows. And we've already had a commission meeting, and I've already gotten the question of growing anti-Semitism in Europe on the agenda. There's going to be a conference now put on in Europe by the commission because of that. The other major focus I'm going to spend time on is the issue of the Persecuted Church, the genocidal activities against Christianity in the Middle East. And I'll be able to do this without in any way leaving or downplaying my work for CUFI. In fact, the appointment itself is the evidence of the growing influence of Christians United for Israel in Washington, D.C. Now, look, you've got some big issues to talk about on the Hill, and David Brogg, I know, is going to do the outstanding job he always does to bring you up to date on those. So I'm going to be relatively brief too. I want to use my time, I hope, to give you perspective on what you're doing today, to give you a little bit of a sense of what your mindset ought to be. You know, this week already on Capitol Hill, and every week, and every day, there are hundreds of groups lobbying on Capitol Hill. I mean, this is what this city is. Some of them are grassroots lobbyists like you. Many of them are hired guns. They're the guys with $5,000 suits and Gucci shoes, and they lobby for whatever somebody hires them to do. But if you can imagine an interest group, they're up there lobbying. So, you know, business groups send all kinds of lobbyists. The unions are all over the place. They want more benefits for their members. Bankers, groups representing the very old and the very young. There's groups up there representing farmers in the big cities. The National Association of Manufacturers has a big lobbying group. There's lobbies representing airlines and lobbies representing airline passengers. And no, I do not want to pay for my luggage. All these groups, even though the subjects they deal with are all over the place, they all have one thing in common. They are going to Capitol Hill to get something for themselves. Now, that's okay. This is a constitutional republic. People have a right to petition their elected officials. People have a right to say, I want my taxes lower, I want my Social Security check to be bigger, and that's what these groups do. But that's not what you do. I mean, this is what makes you so unique. When you go up to Capitol Hill today and spend the time in those House and Senate offices, if you do a good job, your bank account is not going to be bigger. You will not own a better house. Your kid's student loan debt is not going to be forgiven. Because that's not up what you're up there lobbying about. You're going up to Capitol Hill in an act of love. And my friends, if you think about it, this whole thing from the beginning has been an act of love. And when I say this whole thing, I'm going all the way back to Abram walking in the desert and a voice coming out of the heavens out of love saying, I will be your God and you will be my people. That was an act of love. And then when he said to Abram, I will bless you, he then expanded that act of love by including us, by saying, I will bless those who bless you and curse you who curse you. An act of love. He didn't have to include us. It was an act of love when Pastor John Hagee, all those years ago, brought leaders to San Antonio because he loved the God of Abraham and he loved the Jewish people, and he set up an organization to organize people that love God and love Israel and love the Jewish people, right? That's what this is all about. You're doing this on Capitol Hill so other families don't have to go through what the family of Taylor Force has gone through. You're doing it so that the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors do not ever have to worry about that horror happening again. You're doing it for the peace of Jerusalem. You're doing it so that rocket won't land on a nursery in Israel. You're doing it so the Star of David will always fly over Jerusalem, the undivided capital of the Israeli people. You're doing it to defend Judeo-Christian civilization, the two pillars of which are Israel and the United States, a civilization that has brought more liberty and more opportunity and more success to more people in the world than any competitive civilization in the history of the world. In the play, A Man for All Seasons, there is a scene where one of the characters named Richie Rich goes to visit Sir Thomas More because he wants More to help him get a job in government, an appointment in government. And Sir Thomas More doesn't really think Richie Rich is suitable for a job in government. And he says, you know, Richie, you ought to think about being a teacher. And Richie Rich is not happy about this advice. And he says to More, well, if I was a teacher, even a good teacher, who would know? And Sir Thomas More said, well, Richie, you would know. Your pupils would know. God would know. Not a bad audience, that. When you go to Capitol Hill today and do the job we know you will do in those House and Senate offices, the congressman will know the job you did. You will know the job you did. CUFI will know the job you did. And the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus will know, not a bad audience that. God bless you. Godspeed. We're proud of you, and we'll be up there with you today. Take care.
Thank you, Gary Bauer. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 2 years, we have had an opportunity to undo a lot of the damage wrought by the previous administration to create a Middle East that is safer for both Israel and the U.S. But I do not want you to think that just because something doesn't seem as epic and monumental as the embassy relocation, that what we bring before you today is not just as important. CUFI pledges that it will not get behind merely symbolic pieces of legislation just to make us all feel better like we have done something. We present to you material ways that we can bless and protect the nation of Israel and her people. And we are able to do that because we have what others lack. There's always going to be other groups, other causes, other donors, there always is, but you cannot replicate the passion that lies within the heart of a Christian Zionist. We have Israel-shaped holes in all of our hearts, and as such, we yearn to do what we can on behalf of Israel, that holy place where God dwells. Yes, we have a friendlier administration to Israel than in the past, and yes, with God's help, we will be able to accomplish even mightier things, but do not be fooled. The opposition has not slowed. If Pastor were here, he would say, full steam ahead. That's right. If anything, the opposition has only increased. And I want you to be encouraged by this, because if it was not hard, it would not be worth doing. If nobody was fighting against us, then it's probably a fight that's not worth fighting. So do not get lax in this race. Do not let your foot off the gas. Do not allow yourselves to become complacent, luxuriating in past victories, while we get edged out by the opposition. Please, if you could hand out the talking points, if any have not been, please do so. November is right around the corner, and the timing could not be more urgent. The opposition is real. The enemies of Zion are real. And so we must keep in mind that they are fighting us not because of who we are, but because of what we do and because of who we do it for. It is at this time that I would like to introduce David Brogg as he introduces our forthcoming legislative agenda, which has never been stronger or more timely. Please welcome our founding executive director and current member of CUFI's executive board, David Brogg.
Thanks. Good morning. So, thanks for sticking around. It's been a good morning and a good day yesterday. What we're about to do will probably be the most boring part of this conference, guys. And I guarantee you it's the most important part of this conference. It is good to celebrate what we've accomplished. It's good to celebrate the miracles for Israel we've been able to witness over the course of this past year. It's good to celebrate Israel and celebrate being together. But I think Paul Teller from the White House said it best. Are we tired of winning? Let's win some more. Let's get back to work. Let's push forward. Now is the time. Now is the moment. Now is the opportunity. We have a friendly administration, a friendly House of Representatives, a friendly United States Senate. Now is the time we've got to push forward and we've got to lead. It matters now more than ever. And so now is the time when we talk about how we do that. This is why we came to Washington. So we have a little bit of time together. I want to do two things. One, just recap how we need to carry ourselves on Capitol Hill. Because the way we carry ourselves is probably more important than the substance of what we say. And then we want to get into the substance of these talking points in our time together today. People who've been here before have heard this before, but we always have so many new people every year, it's worth repeating. You have two missions when you go up to Capitol Hill. The second, less important mission is to talk about the substance of these talking points. The first, more important mission is to create relationships. Build relationships with your member of Congress and member of the Senate. And if you get a member of their staff instead, lucky day. Make a relationship with that member of their staff, because at the end of the day, they're going to be easier to reach than the member. They're going to be able to keep in touch with you better than the member. And you're going to be able to reach them at critical times to tell them what Christians United for Israel asks and seeks. And when that member of Congress turns to them and says, "What should I do? How should I vote?" they're going to be able to communicate the message. Remember that. This is all about building a relationship. And since what we're after is building a relationship, it pays to be kind. Great way to build a relationship. These people are busy. These people have schedules. If you could see the schedule of the typical U.S. Senator, the typical member of the House. I mean, I always thought I was busy till I worked on Capitol Hill. I thought if I had 4 meetings in a day, it was a busy day. These guys have back to back to back from 8 in the morning until usually 8 or 9 p.m. And things are shifting throughout the day. They've got 3 meetings and a hearing, and then they call for votes on the floor of the Senate. Well, there your day just got shifted dramatically. You've got to go take 15, 20 minutes to vote, then come back. What happens is things get moved around, bumped around, delayed, and shifted. So if you show up at your member of Congress's office for a meeting, and you find you've got to wait longer than you thought you did, or they moved the location of the meeting, please understand, it's not personal. This is life on the Hill. Smile, say, "Of course, we know how busy you are," and move on with the meeting. If you find you wanted the member of Congress, the senator, and instead you get that lowly staffer, speaking as a former lowly staffer, I used to work late every night. I had no life. I'd work late every single night. And then the senator would tell me, "A group is in from out of town. I can't meet with them. You need to go talk to them." Well, okay, I knew that half hour I'm going to spend now with that group is a half hour later I'm staying at night, another date I have to cancel. You know what? When you show up and those people appreciate your time, you're glad you showed up. And if you show up and people look at you and frown and say, "Where's the senator?" you feel a little less glad you showed up. Our goal is to build relationships. Tell those staffers how much you appreciate their time. Tell those staffers how glad you are that they took the time to meet with you. They're going to be glad they did it, and they're going to want to stay in touch. Please remember, not every young staffer on Capitol Hill deserves the enormous responsibility they've been given. Most of them do. Most of them are hardworking. Most of them are really dedicated to this country and their cause. Not all of them are. And you might find some of them want to challenge you a little bit. They want to show you how much they know about Israel. Well, remember, you're not going to the Hill as policy experts, as subject matter experts. We're not claiming that every member of CUFI has a PhD in the Arab-Israeli conflict. You're going to the Hill as something more important than that. You are going to the Hill as constituents, as people who vote for or against these individuals. That means they need to know what you think, and they need to care about what you think. So if someone wants to challenge you on the specifics of the Arab-Israeli conflict, what about what happened back in 1956? You don't need to have all the answers to that. Just tell them, interesting point. I don't know that answer, happy to look into it. But this is what I, as your constituent, am asking. This is what I, as your constituent, seek. And this is what Christians United for Israel, as the largest pro-Israel group in the country, has decided it is asking this year. No need to get into a fight with anybody. We've had staffers in some of the more liberal congressional offices want to push back a little bit. No need to get in a fight. Smile, be kind, repeat our talking points, and remind them at the end of the day you are their constituents, and this is important enough to you that you are here in their office. You all look nicely dressed. You're going to people's offices. We always encourage everyone to dress well. No shorts, no Bermuda shirts. Be respectful of people in their place of work, and they're going to respect you. And then, at the end of the meeting, after you go through the talking points, know when to say goodbye. Everyone is busy. Everyone is pressed. After you've delivered the talking points, if they have questions for you, they will ask them. And then you could say, Congressman, Senator, member of the staff, thank you so much for your time. We know how busy you are. And final thing, especially if it's a member of the staff, try to get a card. Try to get a contact info. Try to stay in touch with them. Try to become a resource for them when they're trying to understand what the folks back home think. And any good congressman, any good member of the staff who wants to stay there will care what the folks back home think. So try to get that card. Try to make sure you can stay in touch with them. What's going to happen is this. There's going to be a vote on Israel. There's going to be a vote on an amendment to a bill regarding Israel. The congressman who is dealing with tens of issues every day is not going to know the specifics. It's going to turn to a member of the staff and say, what should I do? How should I vote? And what you're going to want, the ideal situation, is that that person has spoken to you and they're going to say CUFI is for it or CUFI is against it. At that critical moment, that is valuable. Folks, there are people walking the halls of Capitol Hall in expensive shoes and expensive Italian suits. Lobbyists who have made a lot of money because they have contacts and connections on the Hill. It's all it is. They sell their contacts and connections. If you can leave today with a contact or a connection, it is something extraordinarily valuable. And instead of using it to lobby for tobacco companies, you're going to use it to lobby for one of the most important issues confronting our country in the West today, our relationship with the State of Israel. Get it, use it. It's extremely valuable. All right, let's get into the substance now. In front of you, you all should have your talking points. We start off very quickly with an introduction. You need to remind anyone you meet with of that critical fact. You are their constituent. You are from their state, their congressional district. Now you are important in their eyes. Remind them of that. Remind them that you're not just showing up on your own. You're part of Christians United for Israel, the largest pro-Israel group in the country with 4.2 million members. And remind them that you're here this year, but we're going to be back every year. They should not be under the illusion that they can listen, nod, say very interesting, and that we're not going to be following up. Let them know we are watching what they do. We will be back next year, and our staff in Washington is going to be watching the response to our requests. It's important they know that. If they think you're going to be satisfied with a handshake and a happy snap photo, that's all you're going to get. Kindly, politely, graciously remind them, in so many words, we're watching. Now into the substance. The first issue we're taking on this year is a critical issue. To us, it is in the mold of the Taylor Force Act. It's taking something that is morally clear, a moral bright line, and trying to wake up Capitol Hill to the reality. With Taylor Force, the Palestinian Authority was giving money to terrorists and their families. A moral impossibility, but we were doing it, and all the conventional wisdom in Washington was that we had to do it. Until a group like CUFI came along, with leaders like Taylor's parents. And we said, no, look at the reality. It's wrong, it's immoral, wake up. And by stepping forward and being first to lead, we woke Washington up to that reality. And the Taylor Force Act passed. There's another case of moral blindness, and it has to do with Unruh. It has to do with the way the United Nations treats Palestinian refugees. Everyone knows it's a problem, but everyone says, oh, it's the way we have to do things. It's the way business is done. CUFI is going to go to the Hill this year and lead on the issue of Unruh and try to begin a process by which we wake Capitol Hill up to this moral problem. Here are the facts. The United Nations defines refugees across the world, every refugee population that exists or has existed, the same way. You are a refugee if you were forced from your home, if you fled your home, if you felt you had a fear for staying in your home, if you personally left your home for the right reasons, you are a refugee. But guess what? Your children born to you outside the country of your birth are not considered refugees. They were born somewhere else. Your grandchildren born outside the country of your birth are not refugees. They were born somewhere else. When a refugee moves to Texas from a country, his children born in Texas aren't refugees. They're Americans. They're Texans. It's a silly idea. And guess what else? When you, Mr. Refugee, take citizenship elsewhere, when you become an American citizen, you're no longer a refugee. You're an American, or an Australian, or a New Zealander, wherever you went. Your children don't get your refugee gene, and you lose it when you become a citizen elsewhere. That's the way we define refugees. That's the way it makes sense. But there's one exception. There's one exception. On all God's green earth, there's one exception. And that is the way the United Nations defines Palestinian refugees. They created they have one body that deals with all the refugees on the planet, but they created a special group, UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. And this body defines Palestinian refugees differently. It says, you're a Palestinian refugee if you fled your home in what became Israel during the 1948 war. And your children in perpetuity are refugees. The descendant of any male, they picked male, any male who fled their home during Israel's War of Independence is a refugee in perpetuity. The children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, people who never stepped foot in this land, never saw this land, are considered refugees, the only case of this on the planet. And if you, the original Palestinian refugee, get citizenship in another country, which most of them have, you're still a refugee. You're still a Palestinian refugee. And so what we have is the opposite of what should be. Every other refugee population on the planet shrinks from year to year as refugees get resettled or pass away. The Palestinian refugee population grows from year to year as Palestinians have more children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, whether they have citizenship elsewhere or not. One of the biggest problems we have, one of the reasons why there is no peace between Israel and its neighbors and the Palestinians, is because Palestinian society has developed a bad habit of not looking forward with hope, not building, not engaging with Israel to create what could be an economic miracle in the Middle East. Palestinian culture for too long has been dominated by looking back in anger. They look back in anger. Instead of looking forward with hope and building businesses and lives and cities, they look back with anger and build bombs and missiles and rockets. That is one of the ultimate facts driving this conflict. The United Nations, by defining an ever-increasing population as refugees, by nurturing this resentment, by nurturing this anger, by educating great-grandchildren to cherish the key to a home they never saw more than their lives and their futures, they're not helping to solve this conflict. They are prolonging this conflict. It's got to end. So, we are going to Capitol Hill to begin a process by which we hope to end this bad state of affairs. Congressman Lamborn was here earlier. He introduced legislation on Friday. If you turn to page 2. He introduced legislation on Friday that's going to begin a process to change things. It's H.R. 6451, the Unruh Reform and Refugee Support Act. It's a brand new bill. As you know, usually when we go to Capitol Hill, we have a long list of co-sponsors that you need to thank. It says, as of now, 5 co-sponsors. They're listed in the second bolded bullet point. It is Representative Doug Lamborn, the sponsor, and these 5 co-sponsors. That's it. Brand new bill, brand new idea. And so to go through the specific points, if you look above the bold, point number 1, this is what you want to say to your members of Congress. We got to keep it quick, brief, and focused. Point number 1, we want to say the time has come to define Palestinian refugees the way we define every other refugee group on the planet and support them accordingly. The way Unruh defines Palestinian refugees to include their descendants in perpetuity politicizes their plight and prolongs this conflict. Point 2. This is critical. We can't change the way the United Nations defines Palestinian refugees. We don't have that majority at the UN. But we do have a majority in Congress. And so what we can change is the way our aid goes to UNRWA, just like we changed the way our aid goes to the Palestinian Authority. So point 2, Congress should express support for limiting our contributions to UNRWA to the amount necessary to provide aid to those Palestinians who meet the standard definition of refugees. If someone's a refugee, legitimate refugee, even if they fled their home and didn't need to, fine. No one here is against denying funds to refugees that are currently going to refugees. But we're saying our funds to UNRWA, our funds to take care of refugees, should go to take care of people who meet the standard definition of refugee, not this ever-growing population of people who never lived in the land. So point 2, Congress should support limiting our contributions to UNRWA to the amount necessary to provide aid for the real refugees, the ones who meet the standard definition of refugee. Point 3, Congress should express support for redirecting the remainder of our UNRWA contribution to USAID so this aid can be provided on the basis of humanitarian, not political criteria. We're not asking that humanitarian aid to the Palestinians be cut. So we want the aid to go to the real refugees, the ones who meet the standard definition. Our money to UNRWA should be the amount necessary for them. But the rest of the aid we give to UNRWA should be shifted to USAID, the United States charitable arm abroad, so that we can give that money to Palestinians in need and possibly others in need on the basis of humanitarian criteria, on the basis of actual need, not through this politicized UNRWA process that is dedicated to maintaining and growing a disgruntled refugee class. By shifting it to USAID, we're making an important point. This is not about taking money away from anyone in need. This is not a mean-spirited approach. If anything, it's an excessively generous approach. Our point is not that we think the Palestinians are getting too much money, although they probably are. This is the beginning of an education process, and the first step is to say, we're not focused yet on whether they're getting too much aid or not. Our interest is not taking aid away from anyone who truly needs it. That's not what this is about. Our interest is about no longer politicizing the aid, making sure the aid does not prolong a conflict, making sure the aid is really about helping people in need. So those are our 3 points. And again, it's a technical process, but what we're asking basically is that we look at Unruh. They claim they have 5.5 million Palestinian refugees now. By most counts, actual refugees, actual Palestinians who fled their homes in the 1948 war, probably closer to 30,000, right? We're less than 1%. So if, let's say it's 1%, if 1% of the Palestinian refugees are real refugees, then 1% of the money we give to Unruh should go to them. The other 99% should go to USAID and reach people on the basis of humanitarian need. So we're saying the money needed for refugees, great. The rest, USAID. Folks, we are stepping forward here, as you see, early. We're stepping forward with brave friends in Congress. None of us expect this bill will pass this Congress. It's not the point. The point is it's time to make a statement. It's time to begin a process. It's time to inject some moral clarity here. And it's time to tell everyone who says you can't change this, well, we think you can change this. It will take persistence. It will take time. It will take education. But we've never shied away from a fight if we thought it was the right fight, even if we weren't sure we'd win. This is one of those fights. This is one of those fights. So this is going to strike a lot of people as new stuff, a lot of people as radical stuff. Well, it is new. It's not radical. Policy experts have been speaking for years about how ridiculous this Unruh definition is, but no one's ever taken that conventional wisdom into Congress before. We're going to lead the way. This is something you can be very proud to do, be very excited to do. Don't be surprised if you see some raised eyebrows. Just persist on the basis of this moral clarity. We've done it before. We prevailed before. Eventually, I believe we will effect change when it comes to Unruh. It begins this afternoon. Last point. Last point. In the House, it's very clear what we're asking for. There is a bill with a bill number. Ask your members of the House of Representatives to please co-sponsor it. In the Senate, we don't yet have a companion bill. We don't yet have a Senate version of this bill. So all you can do in your meeting with your senators is say, there is this House bill, and we believe there will be a Senate companion. We believe there will be a Senate version, and we sure hope you will seriously consider co-sponsoring it when it's introduced. In the House, specific bill, please co-sponsor. In the Senate, no Senate bill yet. There will be. We hope when it's introduced, when the Senate companion of this House bill is introduced, you will seriously consider co-sponsoring it. Point number two, talking point number two. It was mentioned this morning by a couple of our speakers. It's the Stop Using Human Shields Act. I want to mention what motivated our getting involved in this issue. Everyone in Israel you talk to speaks about the next war with Hezbollah. Everyone in Israel you talk to says it's not a question of if, but when. And everyone in Israel you talk to says this war is going to be different from the wars we fought in Gaza. In Gaza, Israel had the luxury of being able to take out most incoming missiles. Iron Dome worked well. Hamas did not have enough missiles to overwhelm Iron Dome. It's a pathetic state of affairs that Israelis have to run for shelter with 10 to 30 seconds notice. Pathetic state of affairs, you have to drop everything and run to a bomb shelter multiple times a day. But Israel knew that most of those bombs would not reach their targets. That gave them the luxury to do something rare in the history of warfare. It gave them the luxury of saying, before we take out Hamas missiles, we're going to take every step humanly possible to preserve, save, and protect innocent Palestinian lives. Because those innocent Palestinians are created in the image of Almighty God. Their lives are precious, and we will do everything in our power to protect them. And so Israel leaflets a neighborhood before they come in to take out the missiles. Hey, we're coming. Innocent civilians, leave. Leave by this route. If you do so, you'll be safe. Then, when they get more specific than a neighborhood to an actual building with Hamas missiles, they call or text everyone in the building to say, we're coming. Please leave the building. Save your lives. And then Palestinians started ignoring these warnings because they knew how much Israel values human life. And even after the leaflets and the texts and the cell phone calls, they would go up to the roof of their building to be seen by Israelis. And Israel, seeing civilians on the roof, would have to divert bombs from their target to take out Hamas missiles because they didn't want to harm the innocent civilians. So Israel developed a further method. We leaflet, we call your cell phones, we text your cell phones, and then they developed the knock on the roof. They drop an inert bomb on the roof of these buildings that makes a loud, scary noise, but doesn't explode, doesn't hurt anyone. And it scares the civilians into leaving. Israel saw 8 civilians on the roof. Knock on the roof, we saw 8 civilians leave the building, now we can bomb. Israel had the luxury to preserve and protect innocent Palestinian lives. Hezbollah has between 150,000 and 300,000 missiles in southern Lebanon. That is enough missiles to hit every city in Israel and a sufficient quantity of missiles to overwhelm Israel's missile defense. Which means Israel's going to be faced with a stark choice. Either we take out those weapons or our civilians are going to die. And in large quantities. Israel won't have the luxury of saving innocent South Lebanese lives because they're going to be faced with a stark choice. Either Israel civilians die or some of those civilians die. And Israel will choose what any sane, responsible government on the planet would choose. The first responsibility of any government on the planet, protecting its civilians. That's what they will choose. That's what they have to choose. But why are the civilians in South Lebanon in harm's way? It's not Israel's fault. It's the fault of Hezbollah that is building missile storage silos underneath homes and schools in every village in South Lebanon. It's the fault of Hezbollah that will be firing those missiles from civilian villages in South Lebanon. There's not a village in South Lebanon that Hezbollah has not dug under or inserted itself in. And guess what? Hiding your missiles in a civilian area, hiding your bombs in a civilian home, firing your missiles from a civilian area is a violation of international law because you're endangering civilians. That means everyone involved in the use of human shields, everyone involved in storing missiles in civilian areas, everyone involved in firing those missiles from civilian areas is a war criminal. It is a war crime. And they're guilty of that crime today. If they're building a storage silo underneath a home in a South Lebanese village, they are a war criminal today. We don't need to wait for them to fire that missile at Israeli civilians. The fact that they're positioning it among Lebanese civilians makes them a war criminal today. Israel is desperate that when the firing starts, God forbid, in this war that they believe will happen, that the media and the world won't fall for the same foolish trick again and blame Israel for the civilian casualties in South Lebanon. That's Hezbollah's strategy. It makes sense because they've seen how well it works for Hamas. They're desperate that something be done to educate the world about the reality that there is a party responsible for the deaths of any civilians that will come. It's not Israel, it's Hezbollah. It's the war criminals of Hezbollah. This bill is going to begin that process. The bill that was introduced by Senators Cruz and Donnelly, bipartisan, and Senator Cornyn is a co-sponsor, is going to be the toughest bill yet taking on the issue of human shields. So if you skip to page 3, the brief talking points, the brief summary for everyone on the Hill. Point 1, the use of human shields is a violation of international law. It's a cynical ploy that results in the death of innocent civilians. Point 2, too many observers actually encourage the use of human shields by falling into the terrorist trap and blaming Israel and other democracies when such human shields are harmed or killed. They become morally complicit when they fall into Hamas's and Hezbollah's trap. Point 3, we mustn't wait for these war criminals to begin firing their missiles. We need to go after them today by compiling a list of individuals involved in the use of human shields and subjecting them to sanctions. So this is the reverse. In the first bill on Unruh, we had a House bill with a number, we had no Senate bill. This is the reverse because this bill, this Cruz bill, they're telling us they're going to introduce it today. It's a brand new bill, and we're the first group out of the gates supporting it. So on the Senate side, it's so new we don't even have a bill number. On the Senate side, we can't ask to support a bill number. Just say, hey, there's Cruz-Donnelly legislation called Stop Using Human Shields Act. We want you to co-sponsor it. And then on the House side, we want to be careful. The House has already passed a couple of human shields bills. The list is too long to thank everyone. There's too many bills. We just simply want to note. We know that similar human shields legislation has already passed the House. It was led by Joe Wilson, Mike Gallagher, and these bills focused on specific terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. They were good bills. But this new bill is much more comprehensive. It doesn't limit itself to a Hamas bill or Hezbollah bill. It applies generally to any terrorists using human shields, including, by the way, ISIS, which used human shields and made the lives of our troops fighting them far more difficult in the process. We want you to support this new comprehensive bill. Hasn't been introduced yet in the House. But the Cruz-Donnelly bill will be introduced in the House when it's introduced. When this new comprehensive bill is introduced, we want you to co-sponsor it. So again, the flip side of the first Unruh bill, we have a Senate bill, although there's no number. Senators, please co-sponsor. House, there is no companion bill yet. There is no House bill yet that takes this approach. But we know you've done good work to date. We appreciate the work done to date. And when this new comprehensive approach is introduced, the House companion of the Cruz-Donnelly bill, we hope you'll co-sponsor it. By the way, the bill does a couple of important things. First of all, it condemns the use of human shields. It's not a point that can be understated. But more importantly, this bill instructs the president to make a list of the individuals and entities involved in the use of human shields and sanction them. You know, right now, you got Hamas guys who are involved in the use of human shields going to raise funds in Europe. You have people involved in the use of human shields participating in the international financial system. This bill will name them and sanction them. And it gets this deep, folks. If you're a contractor in South Lebanon involved in building the concrete bunker under somebody's home that will house missiles and missile launchers, you can be named and you can be sanctioned. So this is an important approach. It's calling out the war criminals, it's calling them out today, and it's educating the public in advance so that when, God forbid, there is conflict, and when, God forbid, innocents die because of Hezbollah's actions, more people will understand it was Hezbollah to blame, not Israel. And then our final of the 3 talking points. Number 3 at the bottom of page 3, the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. This bill, unlike the other 2, has been around a while. In fact, we lobbied on this bill last year, but we're bringing it back again. The bill remedies a flaw in our current anti-boycott legislation. Our current anti-boycott legislation says it's illegal for an American company to participate in a boycott of Israel sponsored by a foreign government. The law is written that way because since the birth of the State of Israel, the largest boycott of the State of Israel was organized by the Arab League, by the Arab countries surrounding Israel. It was a country-sponsored boycott. So we passed a law that said it's illegal for our companies to participate in any boycott of Israel sponsored by foreign countries. Well, things have changed. Now we're facing a situation where both at the United Nations and the EU, efforts are underway to boycott Israel. In the UN, this effort is making progress. They've actually produced what they call a blacklist of companies that do business in Judea and Samaria. The next boycotts of Israel aren't coming from nations. They're coming from international entities like the United Nations and like the EU. Well, under current law, there's nothing that would prevent an American company from saying, I want to join that UN boycott. I want to join that EU boycott. This bill would change the law and expand the list of forbidden boycotts to include not only those sponsored by foreign nations, but also those sponsored by international entities like the EU and like the UN. A simple bill updating our anti-boycott law for the times. But why didn't it pass? We lobbied for it last year. And we had a lot of co-sponsors last year, and there were even more after we left the Hill. Why did it not pass? One of the reasons why it didn't pass is because a lot of enemies of Israel started to work against it. They don't like this bill. They like boycotting Israel. And they got on their side the ACLU, which started to say, hey, this bill's a violation of free speech. And it worked. You know, Senator Gillibrand from New York was a co-sponsor. She dropped off. Bobby Rush in the House was a co-sponsor. He dropped off because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of the ACLU. Folks, there is nothing in this bill that limits anyone's freedom to criticize Israel. There's nothing in this bill that limits anyone's freedom to call for a boycott of Israel. That is protected speech under the First Amendment. We can't stop that. We don't want to stop that. I'd much rather argue back. This bill affects commercial action. It affects the business you do. You can harbor horrible views of minorities in America, hateful racist views. The First Amendment gives you that right. You're not allowed to say they can't sleep in your hotel or eat in your restaurant because that's commercial action. You're not allowed to ban people from your business like that. There's a difference between speech, even repugnant speech, and commercial activity. The Supreme Court could not be clearer. This bill only goes after commercial activity, only goes after boycotting Israel. It's already illegal to participate in a boycott of Israel sponsored by a foreign government. What are you getting all worked up about now? It's been the law of the land since the birth of the State of Israel. We're just extending it from those boycotts sponsored by foreign countries to those boycotts sponsored by international entities. So if it comes up in one of your meetings, if someone rolls their eyes and says, well, wait a minute, doesn't this bill offend my right of free speech? That's the issue. That's been the holdup. The answer is no. And by the way, you can note this. A dear old friend of mine is considered one of the leading constitutional scholars in America right now. His name is Paul Clement. Paul Clement has written extensively about how this does not come close to violating free speech. Paul Clement has noted, citing the Supreme Court cases that say you have the right to limit commercial actions. This clearly falls within the commercial action side of the divide. So if someone rolls their eyes and says, oh, no, this limits free speech, you can say, no, it does not. People are free to do and say whatever they wish. This applies only to the commercial action of American companies. It's not changing the law, it's merely expanding the law a little bit. Okay, so if we flip to page 4. Point number 1, it should be illegal for a U.S. company to comply with an international boycott of Israel, or any other country, by the way. This gets into foreign policy, unless our government authorizes the boycott. Point 2, our current anti-boycott law is insufficient. It bars U.S. companies from participating in boycotts of Israel organized by foreign governments, but does not prohibit such participation if the boycott is organized by international bodies, such as the UN or the EU. Point number 3, our anti-boycott law must be updated and expanded to prohibit participation in unauthorized boycotts organized by these international organizations. Action items. Finally, we have bills in both the House and the Senate here. This one is a little easier. When you're meeting with your senators, tab A lists every senator who's co-sponsored this bill. If you see your senator listed in tab A, thank them for fighting efforts to boycott Israel. They're the good guys. If your senator is not listed in tab A, they have yet to co-sponsor this bill, please ask them to do so. And finally, whether your senator is a co-sponsor or not, ask them to speak to their leadership and make sure this bill moves this Congress. The question is going to be, is there enough time to give this bill enough attention on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate to pass it? The only bills that get passed in a busy legislative season are those that get floor time, that leadership says are important enough to get the attention of the full Senate or the full House. So if they're on tab A, thank you. If they're not on tab A, we have a request. Please co-sponsor. And finally, whether they're on tab A or not, please speak to your leadership. This is an important bill. Please make sure it passes the Congress, this Congress, before they adjourn for the year. Action item for your members of the House of Representatives, your congressmen and women. Tab B lists everyone who has co-sponsored this bill in the House. It's a much longer tab, a lot of co-sponsors. If your representative is on tab B, thank them. Thank them for fighting the boycott of Israel. They're the good guys. If your representative is not on tab B, please ask them to co-sponsor. They have yet to do so. If they're not listed, they have yet to co-sponsor. Please ask them to do so. And finally, ask them to speak to their leadership to make sure that this bill gets the time it needs to pass this Congress. We supported it last Congress. It didn't move. We're back this Congress. We want to see it move this Congress. No, by the way, we'll be watching to see what happens. We think now that there's been sufficient work done, sufficient pushback to the false allegations about free speech, that the bill's poised to move. It just needs a push. CUFI is going to give the push. Folks, final point I neglected to mention. Make sure you're organized. You're going to go to your meetings now and discuss how you're approaching the meetings with the senators in the House of Representatives. Make sure you're organized. Make sure someone, a spokesman or 3 spokesmen, are handling each issue, the talking points, briefly, to the point. We ask you only lobby on those issues we put here in the talking points. The power comes from having everyone across the hill talking about the same issues, putting people on the same bills. We ask that you not speak about any unrelated Israel issues or any issues not related to Israel at all. We're a single-issue organization. If we come in professionally, we speak about these issues, we speak about them clearly, quickly, in an organized fashion, we're going to impress a lot of people and have a big impact. If we're all over the map with a lot of issues, or going on too long about these specific issues, it's going to have less of an impact. Final thing I want to say. What you're doing today is rare. There are a lot of lobbyists on Capitol Hill, a lot of well-paid people who make a career out of this. And everyone is used to them. It is rare that so many citizens leave their homes in all 50 states and come to Washington to volunteer to go to Capitol Hill because they care deeply about a cause. You are their constituents. That means you are very powerful. And by showing up here, something very few of their constituents do, you brought a megaphone. We want to be nice, we want to be cordial, we want to be respectful. But remember, deep down, you are their boss. And you are very powerful as a constituent of theirs and one who cares deeply enough about an issue to get on a plane or a train and show up here in their office. They know it, you need to know it. So have the quiet confidence that comes along with such power. Know the responsibility that comes along with such power. Represent CUFI in Israel respectfully, but represent CUFI in Israel with confidence. You all have power today that few people can exercise on Capitol Hill. It's really, when you think about it, an enormous responsibility. We've celebrated a lot of victories over the course of this conference. Whether we celebrate more victories is largely in your hands, and we begin that process today. So it can be a busy place up there. People can be a little pushy. Sometimes people are rude. Remember, you are the ones with the power today. You are the ones with the awesome responsibility today. And you are the ones doing something today that is rare in the history of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you do for the state of Israel and what you're going to do this afternoon. Do it with pride. Do it with grace. Do it with love. Thank you all so very much. God bless you.
Hold on, I have some very important announcements to make. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so I'm not going to repeat what David so eloquently stated, but it is important. The next two meetings are extremely important, so you are fully equipped. Remember, God will not assign you unless He equips you, but you need to keep your eyes and ears open and take action. Now, first of all, you're about to go to your regional meetings. I'm going to tell you state by state where you're going to go, so have your pen and paper ready. Secondly, there have been 70 appointments that have been changed. I know, they can do that. They have the authority to do that. I do not have the list of those appointments. I just apologized to a microphone. But anyway, I have a tendency to do that. I do not have a list of those appointments, but you can confirm your appointments by looking at the screens that you see throughout the building, by going to your CUFI app, those of you that have it, and obviously by going to our congressional appointment desk. So remember, 70 appointments have been changed. I don't know whose they are, but please consult the screens, especially the screens, your CUFI app, and the congressional counter. I am very excited to announce that of the 98 appointments, because we have a representative here from every state of the union, of the 98, amen. One senator said no, one seat is vacant. Of the 98 appointments that we have, We have received 100% confirmation on those appointments. Praise God. Of the congressional appointments, in other words, we can only have as many congressional appointments as the congressional districts are represented. 98 congressional appointment percent, 98% congressional appointments have been accepted. 6 congressmen have not responded to our request. And to coin Ambassador Nikki Haley's phrase, we have taken names. The Bible says it's always good to give honor to whom honor is due, and this time every year, I always ask representatives from Hawaii and Alaska to stand up. Where are you in the room? Would you please stand? Yes, over here. Yes, thank you so very much. Alaska is closer to Russia than it is to DC, so thank you for being here. Again, remember they may not remember your name, but they will remember in the name of whom you came. You are Christians united for Israel. When you leave an office, when you leave an appointment, the congressional representative or senator may not agree with our positions, but I don't want them to ever say, oh, those are Christians and that's how they act. They must always be impressed by your presence. So I am trusting that you will represent the Lord to the best of your ability, because everything in the kingdom of God is in excellence. All right, so now the next point is your regional meeting. That is where some of you are going to get your assignments. Extremely important that you go. And I'm now going to give you the names, the numbers. I'm going to recite the state's name and the office that you are to go to, the room you're going to go to. Region 1, which is Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. You are to go to room 203AB. Region 2, made up of Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. You are to go to room 204A. Region 3, made of Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming, room 201. We will have staff in the halls directing you to these locations. Region 4, made up of Arkansas, Hawaii, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, Ballroom B. You stay right in this room. So Arkansas, Hawaii, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, stay in this room. Region 5, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee, room 206. Region 6, Ballroom C. So you are Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. So Region 4 is in Ballroom B. This is this center. And Region 6 is in Ballroom C. That is that end over there. All right, and then we have our international guests, which are going to go to the ambassadors' offices. You are in Ballroom A, which is going to be that part of this room. Region 7, Kansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. You are in East Registration Tent. That is where you came in to register. Region 8, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, you are in room 204BC. Region 9, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio, you are in room 202B. Region 10, Connecticut, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, you are in room 207AB. Region 11, which is Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, you are in room 202A. Region 12 and 13, which is made up of Delaware, Virginia, Washington, D.C., West Virginia, room 209ABC. Region 14 is in California, and you're right outside, or right in the front of Ballroom A. These regional meetings are extremely important. You will receive your packets, you will receive your assignments, and whether it rains or shines, remember rain is a sign of blessing. It is extremely important that you are at these meetings. It has happened more than once where people have said, oh, they don't need me, they have lots of people from my area, and the congressional representative has been waiting for us to come, and there has been no one there because you were not there. You have an assignment. This is why we are here. You heard the important legislation that we want passed. It is time to stand up for Israel. It is time to take the right move because it is the right thing to do. I love you. I bless you in the name of the Lord, and may you have the best meeting that you have ever had. Thank you so very much. God bless you.